Imagine waking up one day and discovering that the person you swore to love forever is in your bed, in the home you paid for, with another man. Now imagine that you gave that person absolutely everything. A $12 million penthouse. A $4.5 million pink Lamborghini. An unlimited black card. Jewelry worth more than apartments. Private jet trips. Everything. And still it wasn't enough. She betrayed you. In your bed. With a tan personal trainer from the luxury gym you paid for her to go to. While you were in Dubai closing a $15 million deal to give her an even better life. This is the real story of Rodrigo, a CEO only 25 years old who built an $80 million empire and made just one mistake, trusting the wrong woman blindly. But wait, because this story doesn't end with him broken and crying in a corner. No. This story ends with him a billionaire on the cover of Forbes, marrying an incredible woman in Tuscany while the ex-wife who betrayed him watches it all alone in a miserable 35 square meter apartment, earning minimum wage, without the luxury cars, without the jewelry, without the high society friends, with absolutely nothing left except the most bitter regret a person can feel. And the best part? She begged to come back. On her knees. Crying. And he simply turned his back on her. You're going to want to watch this story until the very last second because I guarantee you, this is the most expensive and satisfying revenge you'll ever see. If you like stories where betrayal has real consequences, where the one who laughed last truly laughed best, and where justice is served cold with a side of billions of dollars, then stay until the end because you won't believe what happened. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and turn on notifications because I bring stories like this every week, real stories of revenge, betrayal, money, and power that will make you question everything you thought you knew about relationships. Rodrigo was only 25 years old when the corporate world began whispering his name through the corridors of the country's largest technology companies. While his college friends were still competing for internships and posting party photos from city bars, he was already leading meetings with international investors moving millions of dollars. His tech company, founded when he was 22, had been valued at an impressive 80 million reais, and what was most remarkable was that he had built it almost entirely on his own, with a market vision few people his age could see. Rodrigo was not just another lucky young entrepreneur who had inherited family wealth. He was a business prodigy, someone who turned ideas into million-dollar contracts with an ease that impressed even the most experienced executives. But do you know what made everything even more special to him? It wasn't the money piling up in his bank account, nor the praise from the specialized press, nor even the envy disguised as admiration he saw in the eyes of other CEOs. What truly made Rodrigo's heart beat faster was being able to share every achievement, every victory, every single cent of that fortune with Amanda, the woman he loved more than any million-dollar contract could ever be worth. Amanda was his wife, his partner, the person he had sworn to protect and make happy for the rest of his life, and Rodrigo took that vow as seriously as he took his business. He shared absolutely everything with her, without reservations, without stinginess, without that silly fear some wealthy men have of being used only for their money. For Rodrigo, loving Amanda meant giving her a life that most people only saw in Hollywood movies or glossy international celebrity magazines. The triplex penthouse where they lived wasn't just an expensive property, it was a true architectural masterpiece located in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, with a full 360-degree panoramic view that left any visitor breathless the moment they stepped into the living room. The 3 floors of the penthouse were decorated with furniture imported from Italy, original works of art that cost more than luxury cars, and home automation technology so advanced the house practically thought for itself. The building's private garage housed not just one, but 3 vehicles that together were worth more than $10 million, including a red Ferrari Rodrigo had bought to celebrate his first major international contract. Amanda's closet took up an entire floor and looked more like a European luxury boutique than a simple wardrobe, filled with Hermes bags, Louboutin shoes, and haute couture dresses she wore once and then forgot, hanging there. Private jet trips to paradise destinations happened at least once a month, because Rodrigo believed experiences were worth more than material possessions and wanted to create unforgettable memories alongside the woman he loved. He spared no expense when it came to making Amanda smile, and honestly speaking, that made him genuinely happy. But what truly set Rodrigo apart from other young millionaires wasn't just the size of his bank account or the ostentatious luxury surrounding his life. It was the way he treated Amanda, with a tenderness and attention that completely contradicted the cold, calculating image people usually have of successful CEOs. Every morning, before leaving for meetings that started brutally early, Rodrigo left a loving handwritten note on her nightstand, sincere words that showed how much he valued her. On weekends, even exhausted after intense workweeks, he made a point of planning special moments just for the two of them, from intimate dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants to helicopter rides along the coast just to watch the sunset from a different angle. Rodrigo remembered every important date, every detail Amanda casually mentioned in conversation, every whispered desire she didn't even realize he had heard. When she commented that she had seen a beautiful piece of jewelry in a display window, days later the piece would appear elegantly wrapped on their bed. If she mentioned wanting to visit a certain country, within weeks they were boarding the private jet toward that destination. To Rodrigo, money was just a tool to build a dream life alongside Amanda, and he used that tool with absolute generosity and unconditional love. What made everything even more admirable was that Rodrigo never used his fortune as a form of control or manipulation over Amanda. He never threw it in her face how much he spent, never made a point of reminding her who paid the bills, never used money as leverage to get something in return. The joint bank account they shared gave her unlimited access, no questions, no judgment, none of the suffocating oversight some wealthy husbands impose on their wives. If Amanda wanted to buy a 50,000 real handbag at 3 o'clock on a Thursday morning, she simply bought it, and Rodrigo only found out when he saw the notification on his phone and smiled, satisfied to know she was treating herself. He trusted her completely, blindly even, believing that the love he felt was returned with the same intensity and purity. Amanda had access not only to his money but also to his dreams, his fears, and the vulnerabilities Rodrigo showed no one else in the business world, where he had to maintain an impenetrable posture. He opened himself completely to her, sharing not only material wealth but his deepest essence, firmly believing they were building together not just a financial empire, but a solid relationship based on true love and absolute companionship. Rodrigo's close friends, the few who truly knew the man behind the billionaire CEO, always commented on how he changed when he talked about Amanda. His gaze softened instantly, his voice grew warmer, and even his posture relaxed, as if merely mentioning his wife's name brought an inner peace no professional achievement could provide. Intense business meetings, where millions of reais were on the line and every word had to be calculated to the millimeter, all it took was Rodrigo's phone lighting up with a message from Amanda for a genuine smile to appear on his face. He would interrupt any meeting, no matter how important, if Amanda needed him for something, even if it was just to ask his opinion on what outfit to wear that day. For Rodrigo, there was nothing more important in the world than making Amanda feel loved, valued, and prioritized above any million-dollar contract or business opportunity. He was absolutely certain that money came and went, companies could be sold or fail, investments could go wrong, but the love he felt for Amanda was the only truly irreplaceable asset he possessed. Amanda, in turn, seemed to live in a permanent fairy tale, surrounded by a level of luxury most women only experience in dreams or through their phone screens while watching the lives of international celebrities. She woke up late every morning without an alarm clock, without urgent commitments, without the rush that defines the lives of most people who have to work to survive. Her daily routine basically consisted of deciding which of her 15 luxury cars to drive that day, choosing which of her hundreds of designer handbags would match the look she had in mind, and planning how to spend her free hours between extremely expensive beauty treatments, lunches at exclusive restaurants with high society friends, and shopping sessions at boutiques where a single item cost more than the monthly salary of a successful executive. She had a personal trainer, nutritionist, dermatologist, hairstylist, and makeup artist, all available whenever she needed them, all generously paid for by Rodrigo, who insisted that his wife have access to the best professionals on the market. Amanda's social media was a constant display of sophisticated extravagance, photos in paradise locations, videos inside the private jet, selfies wearing jewelry worth fortunes, stories showing expensive gifts she received constantly. She had thousands of followers who openly envied her in the comments, asking what the secret was to achieving such a perfect life. The funny part, or perhaps the tragic part depending on how you look at it, was that Amanda seemed not to realize how privileged she was. For her, that level of luxury had become so normal, so routine, that it no longer generated the gratitude or wonder it should inspire in anyone even minimally aware. Receiving a 100,000 real piece of jewelry had the same emotional impact as receiving a bouquet of flowers would for someone else, something beautiful but forgettable, just another item to add to an already extensive collection. International trips by private jet were no longer exciting adventures. They were simply convenient transfers between one social engagement and another. Michelin-starred restaurants ceased to be memorable gastronomic experiences and became just places she went because her friends went there too. Amanda was numbed by excess, too accustomed to a reality where everything was possible, where all desires were immediately fulfilled, where the words "no, wait," or "we can't afford that right now" did not exist. She had forgotten, if she ever knew, the real value of what Rodrigo provided, the enormous effort behind every cent that allowed that absurdly luxurious lifestyle. To Amanda, Rodrigo was just the automatic provider of all of it, almost as if the money simply appeared out of nowhere, without sweat, without sleepless nights, without the crushing pressure of keeping a business empire running flawlessly. And perhaps that was where the first problem in this entire story lay, although Rodrigo had not yet realized it. When you give everything to someone without that person having to earn it, fight for it, or even minimally value what they receive, a dangerous dynamic is created where gratitude disappears and the sense of entitlement becomes completely distorted. Amanda began to believe she deserved all of it simply for existing, for being beautiful, for having chosen to marry Rodrigo, as if it were an acquired right rather than a generous gift from a man who loved her deeply. She no longer saw Rodrigo as the incredible partner who gave up time, energy, and resources to make her happy. She saw him merely as the husband who should continue providing that standard of living without questioning, without expecting recognition, without needing emotional reciprocity. The loving notes he left every morning? Amanda barely read them before tossing them into the nightstand drawer. The expensive, thoughtful gifts? She posted them on social media to generate engagement but rarely thanked him personally with the enthusiasm Rodrigo deserved to see. The words of love he whispered before falling asleep? She listened with a distracted hum while scrolling through Instagram, searching for the next item she would ask for the following day. Amanda was slowly but steadily transforming into a version of herself that Rodrigo could no longer recognize, though he didn't know it yet. For now, Rodrigo continued to believe he was building the relationship of his dreams, a partnership where his success would be their shared success, where every professional achievement would translate into more comfort and happiness for the couple. He worked 16 hours a day, believing that every extra hour at the office meant more financial security for Amanda, more possibilities to fulfill dreams together, more peace of mind for the future they planned to build. When he closed a $1 million contract, the first person he wanted to tell was her, not to boast but to share the victory with the person he considered his true life partner. When he received invitations to important corporate events, he always made sure Amanda would be by his side, beautiful and elegant, because he wanted the whole world to know that dazzling woman was his, and more importantly that he was hers. Rodrigo still believed, with all the sincerity of his loving heart, that Amanda valued all of it as much as he valued being able to provide that lifestyle for her. But the reality that was about to be revealed was completely different from the fairy tale he believed he was living, and when the truth finally came to light, the emotional empire Rodrigo had built around Amanda would collapse in a way as devastating as it was unexpected. The first wedding anniversary of Rodrigo and Amanda was approaching, and as expected from someone who loved with the intensity and generosity that defined every one of his gestures, Rodrigo wanted to do something truly unforgettable to mark such a special date. He spent weeks planning every detail, researching what the perfect gift would be that would make Amanda's eyes light up in that way he loved so much. It wasn't just about spending money, although money was definitely not a problem for a CEO whose company was worth 80 million reais and continued to grow exponentially every quarter. What Rodrigo truly wanted was to find something that would communicate, without words, just how special, transformative, and absolutely magical that first year by her side had been. He discreetly talked to Amanda's closest friends, trying to uncover clues about what she wanted most at that moment, investigated her stories looking for subtle signs of interest, and paid close attention to every casual comment she made about cars, jewelry, or any other luxury item that crossed their path. And it was through this silent, dedicated investigation that Rodrigo discovered exactly what would make Amanda's heart race with happiness. Amanda had mentioned a few times, almost always joking but with that sparkle in her eyes that revealed a genuine desire, a famous influencer who had received a fully customized pink Lamborghini Urus as a gift. She showed the photos to Rodrigo with a mix of childlike excitement and dreamy admiration, saying it was literally the most beautiful car she had ever seen in her life. For most husbands, that would have been just another random comment, lost among dozens of other fleeting desires that come and go in any relationship. But Rodrigo was not most husbands, and he certainly did not treat Amanda's desires with indifference or disregard. The very next day after that conversation, he was already in contact with the most exclusive Lamborghini dealership in the country, the kind that catered only to VIP clients with enough purchasing power to buy vehicles that cost more than entire apartments in upscale neighborhoods. The dealership manager, accustomed to dealing with demanding millionaires, was genuinely impressed when Rodrigo explained exactly what he wanted. A fully customized pink Lamborghini Urus in the exact shade Amanda had mentioned, with personalized interior finishes, cutting-edge technology, and every available option that would make that vehicle absolutely unique in the world. The customization process took nearly 2 months, because Rodrigo accepted nothing less than absolute perfection when it came to something meant for the woman he loved. He personally approved every detail of the project, from the exact shade of pink applied to the paint to the type of leather used on the heated, massaging seats. The interior of the Lamborghini was equipped with a sound system that cost more than an entire economy car, with noise-canceling technology so advanced it felt like being inside a bubble of silence even while accelerating at 200 kilometers per hour. The seats were embroidered with Amanda's initials in genuine gold thread, a personal touch Rodrigo insisted on adding because he wanted her to remember, every time she got into the car, that it had been made especially for her. The digital dashboard was programmed with a personalized message that appeared every time the car was turned on, a romantic phrase Rodrigo had written just for her. The total cost of that masterpiece on wheels? 4,500,000 reais, an amount that would make anyone unfamiliar with the world of the ultra-wealthy choke in surprise, but that for Rodrigo represented simply another way of materially expressing the love he felt. The morning of their wedding anniversary dawned sunny and perfect, as if even the universe were conspiring to make that day memorable. Rodrigo woke up before Amanda as he always did, but this time he didn't rush off to the office full of urgent meetings demanding his attention. He had blocked his entire schedule for the day, something extremely rare for someone who often worked even on weekends, because he wanted to dedicate every second to celebrating that important milestone in their lives. He prepared Amanda's favorite breakfast with his own hands, something she didn't even know he knew how to do, since they usually had a full staff handling all household tasks. When she finally woke up, still sleepy and beautiful with that effortless just woke up look, Rodrigo greeted her with a passionate kiss and led her to the penthouse balcony where he had prepared a table worthy of a design magazine. They had breakfast together while the morning sun bathed the city below, and Rodrigo savored every minute of that quiet intimacy, mentally storing it as another precious memory they were building together. Amanda seemed happy, smiling, commenting on how much she loved being able to wake up late and relax by his side without the pressure of time, and Rodrigo felt like the luckiest man in the world for being able to give her that peace. After breakfast, when Amanda was more awake and curious about what Rodrigo had planned for that special day, he gently blindfolded her with a silk scarf and carefully guided her to the private elevator of the penthouse. Amanda laughed nervously, asking 1,000 questions about where they were going, trying to guess what surprise her husband had prepared, but Rodrigo remained mysterious, simply asking her to trust him and wait a few more minutes. They went down to the building's private garage, the exclusive space where the couple's luxury vehicles were kept, and there, under strategically positioned lighting Rodrigo had asked to be installed specifically for that moment, the pink Lamborghini Urus was parked like an ultra-rare jewel waiting to be discovered. When Rodrigo finally removed the blindfold from Amanda's eyes, her reaction was exactly what he had imagined and hoped for throughout all those months of secret planning. She froze for a few seconds, processing the sight of that absurdly beautiful, impossible car right in front of her, with a giant red bow tied to the hood like a Christmas gift straight out of a television commercial. Amanda's eyes widened almost comically, her mouth forming a perfect O of genuine surprise, and for a moment Rodrigo thought she might faint from emotion. Then Amanda screamed, literally screamed with joy in a way that echoed throughout the entire garage, and threw herself into Rodrigo's arms with such force they almost fell to the ground. She covered his face with rushed, emotional kisses, repeating over and over, "I can't believe it, I can't believe it, I can't believe it," like a mantra of disbelief mixed with happiness. Rodrigo held her face in his hands, looked deeply into those eyes shining with tears of joy, and said with all the sincerity he could gather in his voice, "You deserve this and so much more, Amanda. Thank you for choosing to spend your life by my side." They stood there embracing for long minutes, and in that moment Rodrigo was absolutely certain he had chosen the perfect gift, that he had managed to translate the magnitude of his love into something tangible. Amanda ran to the car like an excited child on Christmas morning, ran her hands over the flawless paint, opened the doors with almost religious reverence, sat in the driver's seat, and began exploring every detail of the luxurious interior while Rodrigo watched, leaning against the garage wall, smiling with satisfaction at the happiness written all over his wife's face. She turned the car on just to hear the powerful roar of the engine, played with every button on the digital dashboard, took dozens of selfies from different angles, and seemed genuinely over the moon with excitement. But what happened afterward, in the hours following that initial moment of euphoria, began to plant a tiny seed of discomfort in Rodrigo that he initially tried to ignore. Amanda spent the entire rest of the morning inside the Lamborghini, Not to enjoy the gift alongside the husband who had worked so hard to surprise her, but to conduct a full professional photo shoot exclusively for social media. She changed outfits 3 times, redid her makeup to look even more flawless, and chose different strategic poses that highlighted both her and the car in the same visual composition. Amanda's phone didn't stop clicking, capturing hundreds of photos and videos from every possible angle, testing different filters and edits, writing creative captions designed to generate maximum engagement when she finally posted the content. Rodrigo watched all of this without quite knowing how to react, hoping that at any moment Amanda would put the phone down and turn her attention back to him, to properly thank him, to enjoy together the day he had planned with so much care. But minutes turned into hours, and Amanda remained completely absorbed in the digital world, responding to comments already appearing on the photos she posted in her stories, showing every detail of the car to her friends through excited video calls, planning when she would take the vehicle out publicly for the first time to create maximum visual impact. When Amanda finally stepped out of the car, it was almost noon, and she was glowing with excitement over the number of views and interactions her posts had already reached in such a short time. She showed Rodrigo her phone, thrilled with the thousands of likes she had received, the admiring and envious comments flooding her messages, the number of people tagging friends in the posts saying that was their dream car. Rodrigo smiled, made positive comments about how beautiful the photos looked, congratulated her on her social media success, but deep down, in that quiet place where we store feelings we are not yet ready to admit out loud, he felt a strange pang of disappointment. It wasn't jealousy over the attention she gave her phone, nor resentment about not appearing in the photos she chose to post, nothing that superficial. What bothered Rodrigo, in a way he still couldn't properly name, was realizing that Amanda had spent hours celebrating people's reactions to the car, but hadn't dedicated even 5 minutes to celebrating with him, to genuinely thanking him for the gesture of love that gift represented. She celebrated the likes but forgot to celebrate the gesture. She valued the external validation of thousands of strangers on the internet, but didn't value with the same intensity the internal love of the person who truly mattered. And there was an even more revealing detail that Rodrigo tried to pretend he hadn't noticed, but that stuck in his memory like a small barb. Amanda posted dozens of photos and videos of the pink Lamborghini that day, wrote long captions about how fulfilled she felt, how it was a dream coming true, how grateful she was to the universe for allowing her to live that moment. She tagged the dealership, tagged the Lamborghini brand, even tagged some influencer friends who also had luxury cars, creating a web of digital connections that would boost the post's reach. But at no point, absolutely no point throughout that entire day of nonstop posting, did Amanda mention Rodrigo. She didn't tag him in a single photo, didn't write a single line thanking the husband who had spent 4,500,000 reais to fulfill her desire, didn't even post a small story showing his face and saying, "Look what an amazing husband I have." To anyone viewing Amanda's social media, it was as if the car had simply materialized out of nowhere, a gift from the universe or perhaps the result of her own efforts, but definitely not a gesture of love from someone who woke up every day thinking of ways to make her happy. Rodrigo said nothing at the time, didn't confront her, didn't complain, because he didn't want to ruin a day that was supposed to be perfect with issues that seemed too small to deserve attention. But that lack of recognition lodged itself somewhere in his soul, adding to other small omissions he had been collecting without realizing it. That night, while they dined at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, which Rodrigo had reserved entirely for the two of them, Amanda was still glued to her phone, following in real time the viral success her Lamborghini posts were having. She barely touched the food prepared by a Michelin-starred chef, so distracted she was by the growing follower numbers, by the brands already reaching out offering partnerships, by the possibility of turning that car into profitable content for the coming months. Rodrigo ate in silence, watching the woman he loved be physically present but emotionally miles away, and for the first time since they married, he wondered whether Amanda truly valued what they had together or if she only valued the lifestyle he provided. It was a fleeting thought, quickly pushed to the back of his mind because acknowledging that truth hurt more than Rodrigo was willing to admit at that moment. So he simply smiled when Amanda finally looked up from her phone and excitedly commented that it had been the best wedding anniversary of all time, and Rodrigo nodded in agreement, keeping to himself the sadness of knowing that for her, the best anniversary had been defined by the number of likes received, not by the amount of love shown. Rodrigo's life followed a frantic rhythm that most people would consider completely unsustainable, but for him it had become simply the necessary normal to keep a business empire growing at an exponential pace. Every single day without exception his alarm went off precisely at 5 in the morning, a time when the city was still asleep in darkness and silence, but for Rodrigo it marked the beginning of yet another workday that often stretched for 16 or even 18 consecutive hours. He woke up carefully so as not to disturb Amanda's sleep, since she usually didn't open her eyes until around 11 in the morning or even later, depending on how tired she was from the previous day's activities. Rodrigo took a quick shower, put on one of the tailored suits that filled his personal closet, drank a strong espresso made by the state-of-the-art Italian machine in the kitchen, and before the sun had fully risen he was already in the car on his way to the office. His mornings were packed with strategic meetings with directors, analyses of complex financial reports, video conferences with international investors in completely different time zones, decisions involving millions of reais that couldn't wait even a minute. Lunch, when it happened, was always quick and functional, usually something delivered that he ate in front of the computer while continuing to answer urgent emails or review contracts that needed to be signed before the end of the day. Rodrigo's afternoons were even more intense than his mornings, filled with tense negotiations that demanded absolute concentration and refined strategic skill built over years of constructing that empire from the ground up. He had to stay constantly alert to market movements, to competitors trying to copy his innovative strategies, to expansion opportunities that appeared and disappeared within hours if they weren't seized quickly. It was meeting after meeting, call after call, complex problems popping up out of nowhere demanding creative and immediate solutions. Rodrigo managed a team of more than 200 employees, each with specific demands, technical questions, and interpersonal conflicts that sometimes required the CEO's direct intervention to be resolved properly. He approved marketing campaigns that cost fortunes, made hiring and firing decisions that impacted not only the company but the lives of entire families, negotiated with international suppliers who spoke different languages and had completely different business cultures. The stress was constant, the pressure was crushing, but Rodrigo endured all of it with iron determination because he knew every extra hour of work translated into more financial security, more stability for the future, more resources to give Amanda the luxurious life she enjoyed so much and that he loved being able to provide. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in a parallel universe that seemed to exist in an entirely different reality, Amanda woke up slowly among Egyptian silk sheets with a 1,000-thread count that cost more than the monthly salary of a successful executive. She didn't have an alarm clock, didn't have a set time to wake up, didn't have any urgent commitment waiting for her when she finally decided to get out of that absurdly comfortable king-size bed. The first thing Amanda did upon waking was grab her phone from the nightstand and spend at least an hour scrolling through social media while still lying down, checking who had liked her latest posts, replying to messages from friends, mentally planning what her content for the day would be. When she finally got up, it was to take a long shower in the Italian marble bathroom with a hydromassage shower and imported beauty products that cost hundreds of reais per bottle, and then spend another hour getting ready meticulously as if she were going to a professional photo shoot, because, well, practically every place she went ended up becoming a backdrop for photos that fed her social media profile. Amanda's morning basically consisted of choosing which designer outfit to wear, which handbag to match, which shoes would look most photogenic, and deciding which of the city's 15 trendy restaurants she would have brunch at with her equally idle and privileged friends. Amanda's afternoons followed a predictable and comfortable pattern that revolved mainly around maintaining her appearance and socializing with the city's elite. 2 or 3 times a week, she went to a luxury gym located in the most exclusive neighborhood, an establishment so exclusive it charged absurd membership fees and functioned more like a high-society social club than a place for exercise itself. That place was frequented by successful businesspeople, millionaires' wives, professional athletes, digital influencers with millions of followers, professional models, and an entire interesting ecosystem of beautiful, wealthy people who had extra time and money to invest in sculpted bodies. The gym had state-of-the-art equipment imported directly from Europe, renowned trainers who charged fortunes for private sessions, an integrated spa with advanced aesthetic treatments, and a gourmet coffee area where people spent more time talking and networking than actually working out. It was in that sophisticated and superficial environment that Amanda spent several hours a week, not necessarily because she had iron dedication to physical training, but because it was the right place to be seen, to make important social connections, to post stories showing an active, healthy life that generated thousands of likes. And it was exactly there, between $20,000 treadmills and mirrors that covered entire walls, that Amanda met Tiago. Tiago was the kind of man who drew attention the instant he walked into any room, not only because of his physical appearance, which seemed carefully engineered to provoke exactly that reaction, but because of a magnetic presence he had learned to cultivate over the years working with wealthy, bored women. He had an absurdly defined body, the result of daily hours of weight training combined with privileged genetics and possibly a few chemical shortcuts he would never admit to using but that were obvious to anyone even mildly familiar with the fitness world. His artificial tan was always flawless, neither too exaggerated to look fake nor too subtle to go unnoticed, exactly the kind of tone that suggested someone who spent weekends on yachts and on paradise beaches. His hair was always perfectly styled with expensive products that made every strand fall into place, and his smile was strategically practiced to look spontaneous and charming at the same time. Tiago wore premium workout brands that cost more than an ordinary person's entire wardrobe, everything tight enough to highlight every sculpted muscle but not so tight as to look vulgar. He was a personal trainer, or at least that's what he claimed on the minimalist, elegant business card he handed out selectively, but in truth his main specialty was far more complex and profitable than simply teaching people how to squat correctly. Over the years, Tiago had developed a very specific and morally questionable expertise: winning over wealthy wives. He knew exactly how to identify which women at the gym were emotionally vulnerable, bored in marriages that had lost their initial passion, starved for attention that husbands too consumed by work could no longer provide. He discreetly observed behavioral patterns, noticed which women arrived alone and sad even while wearing jewelry worth millions of reais, perceived which ones spent too much time on their phones looking at photos of happy couples with a melancholy expression. Then Tiago would approach with a calculated blend of natural charm, manufactured genuine interest, and specific compliments that didn't sound like cheap pickup lines but like sincere observations from someone who truly paid attention. He was never aggressive or disrespectful. On the contrary, he always maintained an impeccably professional posture, offering technical help with exercises, giving nutrition tips, slowly building a relationship of trust that could eventually evolve into something more intimate if the woman showed receptiveness. And the women always showed receptiveness, because Tiago knew exactly which emotional buttons to press, which insecurities to exploit, which fantasies to feed until the line between personal trainer and something far more dangerous became completely blurred. When Tiago saw Amanda for the first time, he immediately knew he had found a perfect target, perhaps the most lucrative and interesting of his entire career as a professional seducer. Amanda was visibly rich, that was obvious from the 200,000 real Hermes Birkin bag she carelessly left on the floor during workouts, from the limited edition running shoes that cost more than a month's rent in an upscale neighborhood, from the diamond-encrusted watch sparkling on her wrist even under the gym's artificial lighting. But more important than her visible material wealth, Tiago noticed something far more valuable. Amanda was clearly starved for attention. She checked her phone obsessively between sets, always wearing a slightly disappointed expression as if she were waiting for messages that never came. She sighed often while staring into nothing, with that distant look of someone physically present but mentally lost in melancholy thoughts. She constantly posted photos and videos on social media, but even in that there was something desperate, as if she needed external validation to fill an inner void she didn't fully understand herself. Tiago observed all of that with the precision of a predator studying its prey, and began meticulously planning every step of the approach that would completely change the lives of Amanda, Rodrigo, and ironically himself in ways no one could have predicted at that moment. Tiago and Amanda's first conversation was absolutely casual and seemingly innocent, exactly as he had planned it to be. Amanda was doing an exercise with incorrect form, nothing dangerous, but wrong enough to justify a polite intervention from a professional. Tiago approached with that practiced smile that looked genuine, introduced himself briefly by mentioning he was one of the gym's personal trainers, and offered a few tips on how to adjust her posture to get better results and avoid injuries. Amanda thanked him with a shy, slightly embarrassed smile for being caught making mistakes, but also visibly flattered by the attention from a man as attractive as Tiago. They talked for only a few minutes in that first encounter, nothing more than a perfectly appropriate professional interaction, but Tiago had already planted the first seed. In the days that followed, he always found a way to be working out near where Amanda was, greeted her with growing familiarity, made friendly comments about the progress she was making even if real progress was practically non-existent. He asked about her routine with apparently genuine interest, complimented photos she posted on social media, showing he noticed her beyond the gym, and offered help with workout planning so naturally it didn't seem invasive or inconvenient. Amanda, who spent most of her days alone while Rodrigo worked relentlessly building the empire that funded that luxurious lifestyle, began to eagerly anticipate those casual encounters with Tiago at the gym. She started going more regularly, always at the time she knew he would be there, always wearing her prettiest, tightest workout outfits, always with impeccable makeup even though she knew she would probably sweat during the exercises. Their conversations became progressively longer and more personal, evolving from technical tips about exercises to discussions about life, dreams, frustrations, and feelings. Tiago was an exceptional listener, or at least he pretended to be with impressive mastery, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that conveyed genuine interest, validating Amanda's feelings in a way she hadn't received in a long time. He never criticized Rodrigo directly, he was far too smart to make such an obvious mistake, but he made subtle comments that planted doubts in her mind. When Amanda mentioned that her husband got home late every day, Tiago sighed sympathetically and said something like, "It must be hard for you to be alone for so long," putting the focus on her suffering instead of recognizing Rodrigo's Herculean effort. When she commented that Rodrigo was always too tired to plan romantic outings, Tiago shook his head with fake empathy and replied, "A beautiful woman like you deserves all the attention in the world," deliberately creating a contrast between what she deserved and what she was receiving. And so, week after week, meeting after meeting, compliment after compliment, Tiago systematically dismantled Rodrigo's image in Amanda's mind while building himself up as the perfect alternative. He had unlimited time to give her attention. After all, that was literally his job. He was always available to listen to her complaints and frustrations, because he knew every venting session pulled her closer to him and pushed her farther from her husband. He made her laugh with silly jokes, made her feel young and desired with strategically intense looks, made her believe she deserved something better than a workaholic husband who rarely had any energy left for romance after working 16 hours a day. Amanda began to compare, consciously or unconsciously, how she felt around Tiago versus how she felt around Rodrigo. With Tiago she laughed, felt light, felt seen and desired in a primal, thrilling way. With Rodrigo she felt more like an expensive doll on a shelf, admired from a distance but not truly touched or understood. And the more she made that unfair comparison, completely ignoring the fact that Rodrigo worked himself to the bone precisely to maintain the lifestyle that allowed her to have free time to go to luxury gyms and flirt with tan personal trainers, the more Amanda began to believe that maybe her marriage wasn't as perfect as it looked in the carefully edited photos she posted on social media. Rodrigo was not a naive or inattentive man, quite the opposite. His ability to notice subtle details and analyze patterns of behavior was precisely one of the traits that made him such a successful CEO in the business world. He could identify when a client was hesitant during a negotiation simply by a facial micro-expression that lasted fractions of a second, notice when an employee was dissatisfied at work even before the person verbalized any complaint, and detect minimal changes in financial reports that could indicate future problems if they were not corrected immediately. This sharp analytical skill, developed over years of making decisions involving millions of reais with no room for error, was present in every aspect of his life, including his relationship with Amanda. So of course he noticed when things began to change, when small details in their routine shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. What Rodrigo did with these disturbing perceptions, however, was something he would never do in a business situation. He ignored every warning sign because loving Amanda meant trusting her completely, and doubting that love felt like a worse betrayal than anything she could possibly be doing. After all, he thought with an innocence that would later make him feel a toxic mix of anger and shame, why would someone who had absolutely everything they could want risk destroying a perfect marriage? The first sign Rodrigo noticed but immediately tried to rationalize as perfectly normal and harmless, was the change in Amanda's phone habits. She had always been active on social media, that was nothing new. She spent hours a day creating content, replying to comments, interacting with followers, and Rodrigo never had any problem with that because he understood it was part of modern life, especially for someone with the digital presence Amanda had built. What began to catch his attention was the way she now handled her phone, always placing it face down on the table, always quickly pulling it away when he approached, always making that almost imperceptible movement of closing apps as soon as she realized Rodrigo might see what was on the screen. Notifications she used to check openly, sometimes even showing him when something was funny or interesting, were now verified discreetly with the phone turned sideways, her face taking on expressions Rodrigo couldn't fully decipher but that were definitely not the same as before. She started taking her phone everywhere in the house, even into the bathroom during long showers, even into the kitchen when she went to get a glass of water in the middle of the night. The device was always with her, glued to her hand like an extension of her own body, and when it rang or vibrated, Amanda would flinch slightly before checking the message with an urgency that didn't exist when it was Rodrigo trying to talk to her. Deleted messages were another detail Rodrigo noticed with an uncomfortable knot in his stomach, but one he forced his rational mind to justify in increasingly unlikely ways. Amanda had always left her phone unlocked at home, never used a password or fingerprint lock, something that symbolized the transparency and absolute trust that supposedly existed between them. Rodrigo never had the habit of going through her phone, deeply respected his wife's privacy even with full access, but occasional moments were inevitable when the phone rang near him while she was in the shower or busy with something else. It was during one of those casual moments that Rodrigo picked up Amanda's phone to let her know she had missed a call, and when he unlocked the screen he automatically saw the messaging app open. What caught his attention wasn't any specific message, but the fact that several conversations showed only recent messages, as if the previous history had been deliberately deleted. Conversations with names he didn't recognize, conversations that began in the middle of topics with no context, conversations that clearly had much more content before but now displayed only carefully selected fragments. When Amanda came out of the shower and Rodrigo casually mentioned the missed call, he also asked without much thought, "Have you been deleting messages?" She replied with a forced laugh that didn't reach her eyes, "Oh yeah, my phone was running out of space so I deleted some old conversations." An explanation that was technically plausible but completely absurd considering her iPhone had enough storage to hold a decade's worth of messages without any problem. Hidden laughter began to appear in Amanda's routine in a way Rodrigo initially even found cute, interpreting it as a sign that she was happy and excited about something, but that gradually revealed a more disturbing layer when he paid attention to the details. Amanda laughed while looking at her phone, the kind of genuine, involuntary laughter that slips out when something is truly funny or when you're talking to someone who makes you feel light and relaxed. But whenever Rodrigo asked, "What is it, love? Tell me the joke," she would freeze for a second as if she needed to quickly invent a plausible explanation, and then show some random meme or silly video that clearly wasn't the real source of that laughter. She began to smile in different ways. There was the polite, almost automatic smile she gave Rodrigo when he came home after an exhausting day of work, and there was the bright, genuine smile that appeared on her face when she checked messages he couldn't see. Rodrigo noticed this difference one night when he was sitting on the couch next to Amanda, both supposedly watching a movie together but she obviously more interested in her phone, and the glow of the screen reflected on her face, revealing an expression of pure joy he hadn't seen directed at him in how long? Weeks? Months? He couldn't remember exactly when the last time was that he had made Amanda smile like that, and that realization hurt in a dull, persistent way that he tried to smother with logic. The different perfumes were perhaps the most disturbing sign of all, the one Rodrigo couldn't fully rationalize no matter how hard he tried. Amanda had always had an enviable collection of imported fragrances, dozens of bottles from luxury brands Rodrigo had gifted her over the course of their relationship, and he knew the distinctive scent of each one because he often hugged her and inhaled that aroma he directly associated with the woman he loved. But new perfumes began to appear, fragrances he didn't recognize and certainly hadn't bought, more masculine scents that sometimes subtly clung to her clothes when she returned from the gym or from long lunches with friends. The first time he noticed, Rodrigo commented curiously, "New perfume? I like it, which one is it?" And Amanda replied evasively, "Oh, a friend lent it to me to try, I don't even remember the name," but the explanation made no sense because Amanda had enough perfume to open a store and would never need to borrow from anyone. On other occasions when he hugged her after getting home, Rodrigo sensed layers of mixed scents, as if she had been very close to someone wearing a strong fragrance, too close to be just a casual interaction. He thought about asking directly but was afraid of the answer, afraid of sounding jealous or controlling, afraid that his suspicions might be real and not just paranoia from a husband who worked too much and maybe felt guilty for not giving his wife more attention. But Rodrigo kept trusting, kept believing, kept ignoring all those signs that accumulated like evidence in a trial his mind refused to conduct. He convinced himself with arguments that seemed logical on the surface but were fundamentally built on the fragile foundation of fear of facing a devastating truth. Amanda is happy because she's finally taking better care of herself, going to the gym regularly, feeling good about herself, he thought when he saw those bright smiles directed at her phone. She deletes messages because her phone really was getting slow. That makes perfect sense. Why would I doubt something so simple? He rationalized when the discomfort about deleted conversations returned. The different perfume really is from a friend. Women are always sharing those things. I just don't understand female dynamics, he told himself when that masculine scent once again hit his nose during a hug. Rodrigo built elaborate castles of justification because the alternative, admitting that Amanda might be betraying his trust, was simply unthinkable for someone who had invested not only millions of reais but his entire heart into that relationship. He gave her everything, literally everything, from the 12 million real penthouse they lived in to the unlimited black card she used to buy whatever she wanted whenever she wanted without ever worrying about amounts or explanations. The unlimited black card was, in fact, a perfect symbol of the blind trust Rodrigo placed in Amanda, a piece of plastic that represented unrestricted access to a fortune he had built with sweat and hard work but shared without reservation. Rodrigo never, absolutely never, questioned any purchase Amanda made, no matter how exorbitant the amount or how questionable the necessity. If she wanted an 80,000 real handbag, she bought it without needing permission. If she decided to overhaul her entire wardrobe, spending 300,000 reais in a single afternoon of shopping, Rodrigo only found out when he saw the notification in the banking app and thought fondly that she deserved to treat herself. When the credit card statements arrived showing amounts that would give any normal person a heart attack, Rodrigo simply paid everything without hesitation, without sarcastic comments, without using money as a weapon to control or manipulate his wife. He genuinely believed money existed to be used, that working so hard only made sense if it could provide happiness to the people he loved, and that demonstrating absolute financial trust was one of the clearest ways to demonstrate true love. So even when strange purchases began to appear, expensive gifts for people he didn't know, restaurant expenses at times when she was supposed to be at the gym, Rodrigo questioned nothing. There were also changes in Amanda's physical behavior that Rodrigo noticed but refused to interpret correctly because doing so would mean admitting something was deeply wrong. She began dressing differently to go to the gym, wearing workout sets far more elaborate and sensual than necessary for simply running on a treadmill, impeccable makeup that made no sense for someone who was supposedly going to sweat for the next 90 minutes, hair always perfectly styled as if she were going on a romantic date instead of an exercise session. She returned from these gym visits with a different glow in her eyes, an excitement in her voice when talking about how productive the workout had been, a renewed energy that contrasted sharply with the exhaustion Rodrigo felt after spending an entire day in stressful meetings. Amanda started taking excessively long showers as soon as she got home, 30 or 40 minutes under the water as if she were washing away more than just exercise sweat, and she always came out of those showers with her phone in hand, already typing messages frantically to someone. Her interest in sex with Rodrigo dropped drastically. She always had an excuse ready about being tired or having a headache or needing to wake up early the next day for some commitment that was never very clear, but he saw her awake late into the night animatedly chatting with someone on her phone. Rodrigo noticed all of this, mentally recorded every change, every inconsistency, every behavior that didn't fit the normal pattern of the Amanda he knew, but his love for her was so great, so blindly unconditional, that he preferred to doubt his own perception rather than doubt her fidelity. She's just going through a phase, discovering new interests, growing as a person, he rationalized when he saw Amanda obsessed with her phone. Marriage has ups and downs, it's normal for passion to fade a little after a few years together, that doesn't mean she doesn't love me anymore, he convinced himself when she refused physical intimacy for the 10th time in a row. I'm being paranoid because I work too much and get stressed, projecting my own insecurities onto perfectly innocent behaviors, he scolded himself mentally whenever suspicion threatened to turn into direct confrontation. Rodrigo was so afraid of losing Amanda, so terrified that his suspicions might be true, that he chose comfortable denial over brutal truth, not realizing that by doing so he was only prolonging the inevitable and making future pain exponentially more devastating. And then there were the moments when Rodrigo almost confronted the situation, when the evidence was so glaring that ignoring it required almost superhuman mental effort. Like the time he came home earlier than expected because a meeting had been cancelled and found Amanda on the phone laughing in that genuine carefree way, but the moment she noticed his presence the laughter died instantly and she ended the call in a suspicious hurry, saying only, "I have to go, we'll talk later." When Rodrigo naturally asked, "Who was it?" Amanda hesitated for a second that felt like an eternity before answering, "My personal trainer from the gym, she was giving me some workout tips." And Rodrigo accepted the explanation even though every fiber of his being screamed that something was wrong with that story. Or that night when he woke up at 3 in the morning and Amanda wasn't in bed, finding her on the penthouse balcony speaking softly on the phone with someone, and when he asked she said she was talking to a friend who was going through relationship problems and needed support. Rodrigo thought it was beautiful that Amanda was so present for her friends even in the middle of the night, without asking himself what kind of friend would call at that hour or why the conversation had to take place hidden on the balcony instead of in the bedroom. The truth was there, screaming to be seen, but Rodrigo kept his eyes tightly shut because opening them would mean having to act, having to confront, having to possibly destroy the illusion of happiness he had built so carefully. The invitation to the charity gala sponsored by one of the most prestigious Swiss watch brands in the world arrived weeks in advance, printed on luxurious textured paper with embossed gold details that cost more to produce than many people spend on food in a month. It was the kind of event that brought together the business elite, discreet but influential celebrities, heirs to centuries-old fortunes, and the few young entrepreneurs like Rodrigo who had managed to break into that exclusive circle through sheer merit and a very healthy bank account. The party would take place in the main ballroom of a 7-star hotel with a panoramic view of the entire city, decorated by an internationally award-winning designer, with a menu prepared by chefs who collected Michelin stars the way other people collect stamps, and a guest list so selective that simply having your name included was already considered an unquestionable symbol of social status. Rodrigo was genuinely excited about the invitation not only for the networking opportunity with potential investors and business partners, but mainly because he saw it as the perfect chance to have a special night alongside Amanda, elegantly dressed, surrounded by luxury and sophistication, perhaps reviving a bit of that magic that seemed to be slowly slipping away in their marriage. He highlighted the date in his calendar, canceled any commitments that might conflict with that night, and began planning every detail so it would be a memorable experience for both of them. Amanda received the news about the gala with an enthusiasm Rodrigo hadn't seen directed at something involving the two of them in a long time, and it warmed his heart in a way that almost made up for all the disturbing signs he had been trying to ignore over the past few weeks. She immediately began planning what she would wear that night, spending entire days researching celebrity looks from similar events, consulting professional stylists who charged fortunes for advisory sessions, browsing the websites of the biggest European fashion houses in search of the perfect dress that would make every other woman at the party die of envy. Amanda finally chose an exclusive Valentino creation, a long, intense red gown with hand-embroidered details that had taken Italian artisans weeks to complete, a one-of-a-kind piece that cost 85,000 reis but that, according to the saleswoman at the luxury boutique, would make any woman look like she stepped straight off the Cannes red carpet. The dress needed to be tailored perfectly to Amanda's body by a seamstress specialized in haute couture, with 3 fittings on different dates to ensure every inch of fabric fell exactly where it should, highlighting her curves in a sophisticated way without ever coming close to vulgar. The shoes she chose were sky-high Louboutins encrusted with Swarovski crystals that cost another 20,000 reis, and her clutch was a Judith Lieber swan-shaped piece covered in thousands of sparkling stones, worth 30,000 reis and looking more like jewelry than a handbag. On the night of the event, Amanda took nearly 4 hours to get ready with the help of a full team Rodrigo had hired specifically for the occasion because he wanted his wife to feel absolutely stunning. The professional makeup artist worked meticulously to create a sophisticated look that highlighted Amanda's green eyes in a dramatic but elegant way, using premium brand products that cost hundreds of reis per item. The hairstylist shaped her long hair into classic Hollywood waves that looked like they came straight from a 1950s fashion magazine, setting each curl with imported products and finishing with a spray that would guarantee the hairstyle stayed perfect all night, regardless of wind or movement. The manicurist applied a deep red Chanel polish that matched the dress perfectly, and each nail was buffed until it shined as if it had been professionally lacquered. When Amanda was finally ready and looked at herself in the full-length mirror in the closet, even she was impressed by the transformation, looking like she had stepped straight out of Vogue rather than being simply the wife of a young CEO. Rodrigo, who had been ready for at least an hour in a custom Armani tuxedo that cost 40,000 reis and handmade Italian shoes worth more than an economy car, felt the air leave his lungs for a moment when he saw Amanda coming down the penthouse's internal staircase in that flowing red dress, looking like pure cinema. They arrived at the party in one of the luxury cars from their private collection, a black Bentley Continental GT Rodrigo had bought a few months earlier for more than 3 million reis, because making a memorable entrance at high society events was an important part of maintaining the image of success tied to his name. The hotel valet practically bowed as he opened the door for Amanda to step out, and all the photographers positioned strategically at the entrance immediately turned their cameras toward them, flashes firing non-stop, capturing every angle of the couple who truly looked like they had stepped out of a Hollywood film. Amanda smiled with that practiced expression she had perfected over years of posting content on social media, naturally posing in angles she knew flattered her, while Rodrigo held her by the waist with visible pride written all over his face. They walked the red carpet leading into the hotel's main ballroom, greeting other equally elegant and important guests, and Rodrigo couldn't stop thinking how lucky he was to have that stunning woman by his side, how all the men there looked at Amanda with barely disguised admiration, how he had managed to build such a perfect life at only 25 years old. In that moment, with Amanda beautiful beside him and his professional success secure, Rodrigo felt on top of the world, completely unaware of the devastating storm that was about to begin. The ballroom where the party was being held was a masterpiece of decor that probably cost more than 1 million reis in imported flowers alone, arranged in elaborate displays that seemed to defy gravity. Baccarat crystal chandeliers lit the space with a soft, romantic glow. Round tables covered in Irish linen were strategically placed around a polished marble dance floor, and impeccably dressed waiters circulated offering Dom Perignon champagne and canapés that were true works of culinary art. A live band played smooth jazz that created a sophisticated atmosphere without being intrusive, and there was an even more exclusive VIP area inside the already exclusive event, reserved only for the guests of highest social and financial importance. Rodrigo was immediately approached by several businesspeople and investors who wanted to talk about potential partnerships, exchange discreet business cards, and schedule future meetings where they would discuss deals worth millions of reais. Amanda, in turn, was quickly absorbed by a group of millionaires' wives who welcomed her into their circle, gushing about how stunning the dress was, asking which designer it was, wanting to know where she had bought the accessories that completed the look. For a few minutes, maybe even half an hour, everything seemed absolutely perfect, as if that night really would become the special memory Rodrigo had planned to create, a romantic pause in the increasingly distant routine that had been defining their marriage lately. But then Rodrigo saw something that made his stomach tighten in a way he couldn't fully understand at first, a visceral wave of discomfort that came before any rational comprehension of what was happening. Amanda was chatting animatedly with the other women, laughing in that genuine way Rodrigo missed so much when it wasn't directed at him, when suddenly her entire body language shifted subtly but undeniably. She stood a little straighter, her smile intensified, her eyes lit up in a different way, and Rodrigo instinctively followed the direction of her gaze, trying to identify what had caused that transformation. That was when he saw Tiago for the first time, though he obviously didn't know who the man was in that initial moment. He only registered someone young, absurdly handsome in an almost artificial way, wearing a tuxedo that was probably rented but still fit perfectly over a body clearly sculpted through obsessive dedication and expensive gyms. Tiago was accompanying an older socialite Rodrigo vaguely recognized as the wife of a real estate businessman, likely there as a paid companion or a personal trainer invited as a courtesy, and he moved through the room with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, clearly comfortable in that luxurious environment even though he hadn't originally come from that world. What truly disturbed Rodrigo, what made every muscle in his body tense involuntarily, was realizing it wasn't just Amanda looking at Tiago with that unmistakable interest, but that Tiago was looking back, and there was something in the exchange between them that went far beyond anything casual or coincidental. It was the kind of look two people share when they have a secret, when there's a prior intimacy they try to disguise in public but that leaks through carefully controlled expressions. Amanda looked away quickly when she realized Tiago was staring at her, but the smile that rose on her lips was impossible to hide, that involuntary, slightly guilty smile of someone who has just been caught doing something they shouldn't. Tiago, for his part, had the audacity to smile back before turning to pay attention to the older socialite accompanying him, who was chattering about something completely irrelevant. Rodrigo felt a wave of heat rise up his neck, his breathing became a little more difficult, and for the first time since he had begun noticing the strange signs in Amanda's behavior, he allowed the real possibility of cheating to enter his mind consciously instead of immediately repressing it and rationalizing it as unjustified paranoia. Over the next hour, Rodrigo tried to focus on his business conversations with potential investors, smiled at the appropriate moments, nodded when agreement was expected, handed out business cards and scheduled future meetings, but a significant part of his attention was constantly monitoring Amanda and that mysterious man who clearly had some kind of connection with his wife. He discreetly observed how Amanda found excuses to circulate through the ballroom in ways that inevitably placed her within Tiago's line of sight, how she checked her phone more frequently even though it was considered rude at a social event, how she laughed a little too loudly at her friends' jokes as if she were performing for a specific audience. Tiago, always accompanied by the older socialite who had apparently brought him, also seemed constantly aware of Amanda's location in the room, his eyes searching for her with a regularity that couldn't possibly be coincidence. And 2 or 3 times Rodrigo was absolutely certain he saw them exchange quick but intense glances through the crowd of elegant guests. With each observation, the elaborate architecture of denial Rodrigo had built over the past weeks began to crack, small fractures that threatened to become a total collapse if he let reality finally break through the emotional defenses he had erected. The most unsettling moment of the entire night happened when the band began playing a more romantic song and several couples moved onto the dance floor in soft, elegant steps under the gentle light of the crystal chandeliers. Rodrigo, trying to salvage a bit of the magic he had planned for that night, offered Amanda his hand and asked if she would like to dance, hoping that moment of physical intimacy would reconnect them somehow. Amanda accepted with a smile that didn't fully reach her eyes, and they moved together across the floor in steps they had practiced during ballroom classes they had taken months earlier. But even there, in his arms, with romantic music playing and the perfect atmosphere around them, Rodrigo could feel Amanda was mentally distant. Her body was there, but her mind was somewhere else. And then, over her shoulder as they danced, Rodrigo saw Tiago looking directly at Amanda with an intensity that was impossible to interpret as anything other than clear, present desire, and what was even worse, Amanda turned her head slightly and met that gaze, holding it for 2 or 3 seconds that felt like an eternity before quickly looking away as if she'd been burned. Rodrigo felt his heart sink in his chest. The music suddenly sounded distant as if it were coming from far away, and for the first time he had to face the terrible possibility that all the signs he had been ignoring pointed to a betrayal already happening, perhaps for weeks or even months, right under his nose. When the song ended and they returned to the table where they were seated, Rodrigo was silent in an unusual way, processing internally the storm of emotions that discovery was stirring, trying to decide whether he should confront Amanda right there or wait until they got home for a serious conversation that could potentially destroy the marriage he valued so deeply. Amanda, perhaps realizing she had been too obvious in the looks she exchanged with Tiago, tried to make up for it by being overly affectionate with Rodrigo for the rest of the night, squeezing his hand harder than necessary, laughing at the jokes he made to other guests even when they weren't particularly funny, posing for photos beside him with that perfectly calibrated smile of a happy, loving wife. But it all felt fake now to Rodrigo, like a calculated performance instead of genuine affection, and he caught himself wondering how many other times in recent months that performance had been just that, convincing acting covering a completely different reality. They stayed at the party until the end because leaving early would have been socially inappropriate and drawn unwanted attention, but Rodrigo could barely focus on anything beyond the growing sense that his perfectly constructed world was starting to collapse, and that maybe it had been collapsing for a long time while he willingly kept his eyes closed to the destruction unfolding around him. The weeks following the gala were a period of silent psychological torture for Rodrigo, who desperately tried to maintain his normal routine of work and personal life while a growing part of his mind became obsessed with the possibility of betrayal he could no longer fully ignore. He kept waking up at 5 in the morning, going to the office, leading important meetings, closing million-real deals, but all of it felt like it was happening on autopilot while his real thoughts constantly circled around Amanda and that man from the party whose name he still didn't know, but whose image was permanently burned into his memory. Rodrigo began paying closer attention to every detail of his wife's behavior, noticing patterns that had previously gone unnoticed or were easily rationalized, and the more he watched, the more disturbing evidence piled up. The gym visits that used to happen 2 or 3 times a week were now practically daily, always at the same times, always with that excessive excitement that made no sense for someone who was supposedly just going to work out. Amanda came back from those sessions visibly different, with that glow in her eyes of someone who had just spent time with a person who made her feel special, and the long showers she took as soon as she got home seemed more and more suspicious, as if she were washing away not only sweat but evidence of something that couldn't be discovered. But Rodrigo still didn't have the courage to confront her directly. He still clung to a fragile, irrational hope that maybe he was seeing things that weren't there, projecting his own insecurities onto perfectly innocent situations, and that accusing Amanda without concrete proof would be a terrible injustice that could destroy a marriage that might still be intact. So he waited, watched, suffered in silence while continuing to work like crazy to keep his business empire growing and to give Amanda the luxurious lifestyle that apparently wasn't enough to keep her faithful. It was in this fractured mental state, swinging between denial and suspicion, between hope and despair, that Rodrigo boarded a business trip to Dubai that had been planned for months and couldn't be cancelled without seriously harming the company's international expansion. The trip would last 5 full days, during which he would negotiate a deal with Arab investors who would inject $15 million into his company in exchange for a minority share of future profits, an absolutely crucial deal that demanded his physical presence and refined negotiating skill. Amanda would be alone at home during those days, and when Rodrigo said goodbye to her at the airport before boarding the first-class flight, he hugged her with almost desperate intensity, as if some part of him already knew that trip would change everything irreversibly. Dubai was professionally triumphant but emotionally torturous for Rodrigo, who could function perfectly during the long business meetings but then, alone in the presidential suite of the 7-star hotel where he was staying, became obsessed with checking Amanda's social media for clues about what she was doing while he was on the other side of the world. Her posts kept showing an apparently normal life, mirror photos in her closet wearing expensive workout clothes before going to the gym, selfies having breakfast on the penthouse balcony, stories of shopping in luxury boutiques, all very similar to the content she always posted and revealing absolutely nothing suspicious to anyone who didn't know the intimate details of the situation. But Rodrigo noticed small details that deeply unsettled him, like the fact that Amanda was wearing particularly meticulous makeup in photos that were supposedly taken before working out, or how she seemed to be posting far less content than usual, as if she were too busy with other activities to maintain the constant online presence that had always characterized her behavior. Their video calls were brief and superficial. Amanda always had some excuse about being in a rush or too tired to talk for long, and Rodrigo felt an emotional distance that went far beyond the thousands of physical miles separating them temporarily. On the third day in Dubai, after a particularly intense negotiation that lasted 12 consecutive hours, Rodrigo finally managed to close the $15 million deal he had come for, a professional triumph that should have left him euphoric but instead produced only a hollow, mechanical satisfaction. He signed the final documents surrounded by lawyers and Arab investors who congratulated him enthusiastically on the partnership's success, shook firm hands, posed for official photos that would be used in press releases announcing the agreement, and as soon as possible excused himself politely to the hotel room where he could finally process the victory away from professional eyes. The first person Rodrigo wanted to tell about the successful negotiation was Amanda, as it always was, because sharing professional wins with the woman he loved was part of what made those victories meaningful rather than just numbers rising in bank accounts. He picked up his phone excited to call her, wanting to see the joy on her face when she learned they were even richer, that the company had taken another giant leap toward the billion-dollar unicorn status he dreamed of achieving. But then Rodrigo looked at the clock and quickly calculated the time difference. It was 3 in the afternoon in Dubai, which meant it was 8 in the morning in Brazil, and he decided that instead of calling he would make an even better surprise by going home one day earlier than planned. The decision to return early was made completely impulsively, driven by a mix of wanting to share the news of the closed deal in person and perhaps, though Rodrigo wouldn't admit it even to himself in that moment, wanting to check whether his paranoid suspicions were real or just the result of a mind too stressed by work. He instructed his executive assistant to reschedule his flight back for that very night, managing to secure a seat on the last commercial first-class flight that would arrive in Brazil early the next morning. Rodrigo didn't tell Amanda about the change of plans, truly wanting to surprise her, imagining perhaps waking her with breakfast in bed and the exciting news about the $15 million he had just brought into the company. He packed quickly, thanked the hotel team for their impeccable service, and headed to Dubai International Airport still wearing the designer suit he had used during the final meeting. The 14-hour flight was a torture of rising anxiety. Rodrigo couldn't sleep for even a minute despite the comfort of the first-class seat that turned into a bed. He just stared out the window at the darkness outside while his mind created and recreated scenarios about what he would find when he got home, swinging between romantic anticipation and absolute terror. The taxi dropped Rodrigo at the entrance of the luxury building where the triplex penthouse was around 7:30 on a sunny Thursday morning, a time when Amanda would normally still be sleeping deeply because she never woke up before 10 or 11. He greeted the doorman, who looked surprised to see him back earlier than expected, took the private elevator that went straight up to the penthouse, and during the 30th-floor ascent his heart beat faster and faster in a way he tried to convince himself was just excitement about the surprise, not a terrible premonition about what he was about to discover. The penthouse door was locked as usual. Rodrigo used the digital key and entered quietly, truly intending to catch Amanda by surprise, maybe still asleep, beautiful among the silk sheets. The apartment was quiet, but there were clear signs she was awake. A half-finished cup of coffee on the kitchen counter, soft music playing through the ambient sound system, the air conditioning set a few degrees colder than normal. Rodrigo left his suitcase by the entrance, took off his shoes so he wouldn't make noise, and started up the internal staircase to the second floor where the master suite was, that luxurious space of more than 80 square meters that included a walk-in closet, an Italian marble bathroom, and a king-size bed that alone had cost 50,000 reis. It was when he was midway up the stairs, still not visible to anyone on the upper floor, that Rodrigo heard Amanda's laughter, that genuine, carefree laugh he loved so much but that had become so rare when directed at him in recent months. The sound came from the bedroom, and there was something in the quality of that laughter, in the intimacy it carried, that made Rodrigo freeze halfway through stepping up another stair. Then he heard a male voice, low and confident, saying something he couldn't fully make out but that made Amanda laugh again, and in that moment Rodrigo knew with absolute, devastating certainty what he was about to witness, yet his body kept climbing the remaining steps as if on autopilot, as if he needed to see it with his own eyes for it to become real instead of just another torturing suspicion. He reached the top of the stairs, turned left toward the bedroom, and the master suite door was slightly open, allowing him to see perfectly into that space that should have been sacred, the sanctuary of their marriage, the place where they had made love countless times and where Rodrigo often fell asleep holding Amanda, dreaming of the future they would build together. And there, on the bed Rodrigo had personally chosen and paid 50,000 reis for, among the Egyptian silk sheets he replaced every 3 months because he wanted Amanda to always have maximum comfort, in the 12 million real penthouse bedroom he had bought thinking he was building a home for them, were Amanda and Tiago completely naked and intertwined in a way that left absolutely no room for any alternative interpretation. They weren't just lying there, they were in the middle of obvious physical intimacy, their clothes scattered across the marble floor, showing the haste with which they had been removed, the expressions on their faces revealing a familiarity that only comes from something that has happened many times before. The entire world seemed to slow down for Rodrigo in that moment. Every detail was permanently burned into his memory with brutal, relentless clarity. The way Tiago's arm lay possessively across Amanda's waist, the way she had been laughing carefree seconds before noticing Rodrigo in the doorway, even the pink Lamborghini Urus Rodrigo had given her was partially visible through the panoramic window like a cruel reminder of everything he had offered, and that apparently had not been enough. Amanda saw Rodrigo first, and the transformation in her face was instant and devastating, the laughter dying completely, her eyes widening in pure terror, all color draining from her face as the reality of the situation hit with inescapable force. Rodrigo didn't scream, though part of him wanted to scream until his voice gave out completely. He didn't lunge to attack Tiago physically, though the rage he felt was intense enough to justify violence. He didn't cry, though he felt the tears burning behind his eyes, demanding to be released. He simply stood there in the bedroom doorway, staring at the scene that shattered the life he had built so carefully, slowly processing the full extent of the betrayal he was witnessing. Tiago, in a moment of panic, tried to cover himself with the sheet and began stammering pathetic excuses that made no sense at all, but Rodrigo didn't even look at him. He couldn't take his eyes off Amanda, who was now also trying to cover herself frantically as if modesty still mattered at that point. He finally spoke, and his voice came out frighteningly calm, almost indifferent, as if he were commenting on the weather instead of the total collapse of his marriage. "I understand." 2 words, just 2 words carrying the weight of months of confirmed suspicion, of betrayed love, of completely destroyed trust. Then Rodrigo looked straight into Amanda's eyes, those green eyes he loved so much and that were now full of tears of guilt or maybe only fear of the consequences, and said with a coldness he didn't know he was capable of feeling, "I gave you everything. Absolutely everything." And then, without waiting for an answer, without giving her a chance to try to explain or apologize, Rodrigo simply turned his back and walked out. He went down the stairs, grabbed the suitcase he had left by the entrance, and left the penthouse with the same artificial calm he had shown when he discovered the betrayal, as if he were on autopilot, as if the real Rodrigo were suspended somewhere outside his body, watching it all happen from a distance. It was only when he stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, finally isolating him from that devastating scene, that Rodrigo allowed the mask of control to crack slightly. His legs weakened and he had to brace himself against the elevator's mirrored wall, seeing his own reflection showing a man completely destroyed on the inside even if he still looked composed on the outside. The descent of 30 floors seemed to last an eternity and a second at the same time, and when the doors opened in the lobby Rodrigo forced his body to move, nodded to the doorman as if nothing had happened, and walked to the Bentley parked in the garage. He got into the 3 million real car, closed the door and finally, alone in that space of luxury and Italian leather, Rodrigo let the first tear fall, followed by another and another, until he was silently crying, hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough for his knuckles to turn white, processing the unbearable pain of having devoted everything he had, all his love, all his money, all his trust, to someone who betrayed him in the cruelest way possible in their bed with a man who probably laughed behind his back while enjoying everything Rodrigo's money provided. Rodrigo spent the next several hours driving aimlessly through the city, crossing busy avenues without really paying attention to where he was going, the 3 million real Bentley serving as a temporary cocoon where he could process the emotional devastation away from curious eyes or inconvenient questions. He turned off his phone after Amanda tried calling for the 10th time in a row. He wasn't ready to hear any explanation or excuse she might try to fabricate, because frankly there was nothing that could be said to justify or minimize what he had witnessed that morning. Around noon, when the car was running low on fuel and he finally had to stop at a gas station, Rodrigo turned his phone back on and was immediately bombarded with 53 messages from Amanda, each one more desperate than the last, starting with "Rodrigo, please let me explain," and escalating to "you can't just ignore me like this, we need to talk," and eventually reaching, "at least tell me where you are so I know you're okay." He read every message with a kind of emotional detachment, as if he were reading about someone else's life instead of his own personal tragedy, and then typed a single short, direct reply: "I'm going to be away for a few days. Don't look for me. When I get back, we'll resolve this properly." He sent the message, temporarily blocked her number, and drove to the most expensive hotel in the city, where he paid for a presidential suite using a corporate credit card, needing a neutral space where he could finally stop pretending he was fine and completely fall apart in private. It was 3 full days locked inside that hotel suite, 3 days during which Rodrigo canceled all work meetings with a vague excuse about health issues requiring immediate attention. 3 days in which he swung between uncontrollable rage that made him want to smash every expensive piece of furniture in the room and a sadness so deep it completely paralyzed his ability to function. He spent hours lying on the king-size bed staring at the ceiling, mentally replaying every moment of his relationship with Amanda, questioning which signs he had missed, exactly when the betrayal had begun, how many times they had slept together in that bed while he worked like a maniac to pay for the things she used to impress her lover. Meals sent by room service went untouched at the entrance of the suite. Rodrigo had absolutely no appetite. The very idea of food made his stomach churn in a way that had nothing to do with physical hunger. He drank expensive whiskey straight from the bottle, not to get drunk but simply to slightly numb the emotional pain that threatened to consume him completely. In moments of weakness, he picked up his phone wanting to call Amanda and ask why, simply why everything he had given wasn't enough, but he always managed to stop himself before making that mistake which he would interpret as weakness. On the 4th day, when Rodrigo finally felt he had processed enough of the initial pain to function minimally as a human being, he made a decision that would completely change the course of the situation. He would return to the penthouse, face Amanda, and have the conversation that was inevitably pending between them. He took a long shower, put on clean clothes, looked in the mirror and saw a man visibly different from the one who had boarded the flight to Dubai excited just a week earlier. His eyes were sunken and tired, his expression was hard in a way it had never been before. There was something broken there that might never be fully repaired. Rodrigo left the hotel, got into the Bentley, and drove back to the luxury building where the penthouse was located, which no longer felt like a home but simply another expensive property devoid of emotional meaning. The doorman greeted him with professional formality that didn't allow personal questions, though his eyes showed barely disguised curiosity about where the CEO had been for the past few days. Rodrigo took the private elevator, rose the 30 floors that felt like an eternity, used the digital key to open the penthouse door, and found Amanda waiting for him in the living room as if she had spent the last several days sitting there anticipating his return. Amanda's appearance was visibly affected by the situation. She was wearing casual clothes with no makeup, which was extremely rare for someone who didn't even go to the gym without being perfectly put together. Her eyes were swollen and red, indicating she had cried a lot, and there was tension throughout her body suggesting extreme nervousness about how that conversation would unfold. As soon as she saw Rodrigo enter, Amanda quickly stood up from the Italian leather armchair that cost 60,000 reis and began walking toward him with her hands extended as if to hug him, but he raised a hand ordering her to stop, and his voice came out cold and controlled in a way that made Amanda immediately step back. "Don't come near me. Sit there and let's talk like adults about how we're going to resolve this situation." Amanda obeyed without questioning, returning to the chair as tears began to stream down her face, and Rodrigo sat on the opposite sofa, deliberately maintaining physical and emotional distance between them. For a few seconds that felt like hours, neither of them said anything. They just sat there staring at each other across that space that now felt like an unbridgeable abyss, until Rodrigo finally broke the silence with the most obvious and at the same time most painful question. "How long? How long have you been cheating on me with that guy?" Amanda's answer was anything but what Rodrigo expected or needed to hear at that moment of brutal vulnerability, when a tiny part of him still hoped there might be some explanation that would make everything a little less devastating. She didn't fall at his feet begging for forgiveness as Rodrigo had secretly imagined might happen. She didn't cry uncontrollably taking full responsibility and admitting she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She didn't show genuine remorse or true regret for betraying the trust of someone who had literally given her everything. Instead, Amanda wiped her tears with the back of her hand, straightened her posture slightly, and said with a coldness Rodrigo never imagined she was capable of, 3 months. "I met Tiago at the gym 3 months ago." She said it as if reporting a neutral, inevitable fact, without the shame or humiliation that should accompany a confession of infidelity, and then continued before Rodrigo could fully process that information. But you need to understand, Rodrigo, this isn't entirely my fault. You're always absent, always working, always too busy to pay attention to me. When was the last time you really looked at me? When was the last time you actually talked to me instead of just asking how my day was while checking emails on your phone? Rodrigo felt a wave of rage so intense surge through his body that he had to clench his fists and take a deep breath to avoid screaming or doing something he would later regret, because what Amanda was doing at that moment was even more repulsive than the betrayal itself. She was trying to shift the blame onto him, twisting the situation so that she became the victim of a neglectful husband. I work 16 hours a day, Rodrigo said, his voice shaking with contained anger, to maintain the lifestyle that lets you spend your afternoons at the luxury gym where you met your lover. I close million-dollar contracts so you can buy 80,000 real handbags without blinking. I built an empire from scratch so you could live in this 12 million real penthouse and drive a 4.5 million real pink Lamborghini. And you think you have the right to complain that I'm absent? You think cheating is a reasonable response to a husband who works too much precisely to give you everything you want? His words were loaded with bitterness he didn't know he was capable of feeling, each sentence underscoring exactly how much he had sacrificed and how little it had been valued or respected. But Amanda didn't back down or show shame in the face of that direct confrontation about her grotesque ingratitude. On the contrary, she doubled down on the narrative that she was the one suffering in the relationship and that Rodrigo needed to assume his share of responsibility for the collapse of the marriage. I didn't ask you to work so much, she said with an indignation that bordered on absurd given that she directly benefited from every cent that excessive work generated. I wanted a present husband, someone who gave me attention, not just money. Tiago makes me feel seen. He really cares about me. He takes the time to listen and understand me in a way you haven't for months. She genuinely believed her own distorted narrative, convincing herself that betrayal was a logical and even justifiable consequence of having a workaholic husband, completely ignoring that Tiago only had so much free time to listen, because he didn't have an 80 million real company to run, and that all that romantic interest was most likely carefully calculated to gain indirect access to the fortune Rodrigo had built. What disturbed Rodrigo most during that devastating conversation wasn't even the confession of the affair itself, since he already knew what had happened from the moment he caught them in bed, but the total lack of genuine accountability Amanda displayed. She cried, yes, but the tears seemed more about self-pity and fear of consequences than true remorse for deeply hurting someone who loved her. She talked about her own feelings, her own unmet needs, her own loneliness, but at no point did she seem to seriously consider the pain she had caused Rodrigo or the gravity of the betrayal she had committed. And there was an even more revealing detail, almost comical in its grotesque audacity, that Rodrigo noticed only when his eyes scanned Amanda's body looking for any sign of genuine remorse. She was wearing the Tiffany diamond necklace he had given her just 2 months earlier, an extremely expensive piece that alone cost 250,000 reais and had been chosen specifically because Amanda had casually commented that she loved that model. There she was, confessing to a 3-month affair, trying to justify infidelity by blaming her husband for working too much, and still wearing without any embarrassment the jewelry that work had paid for. Rodrigo pointed at the necklace with a bitter smile that held no real humor, only absolute disbelief at the shameless hypocrisy. "You're wearing the necklace I gave you," he said calmly, each word slow and deliberate. 250,000 reais. I bought it because you said you loved that design. Did you wear that necklace while you were cheating? Did you wear my jewelry while you slept with him in my bed in my house, with the money I earn? Amanda automatically brought her hand to the necklace as if only then realizing she was wearing it, and had the decency to look at least minimally ashamed, but even so she didn't take it off, as if even in that moment of total confrontation she couldn't give up the material symbols of luxury she had grown accustomed to. "That has nothing to do with this," she murmured weakly, but they both knew it had everything to do with it. It was the perfect symbol of how Amanda had taken everything Rodrigo offered with love and used it to build a parallel life of betrayal without ever truly caring about his feelings. The conversation went on for some time, Rodrigo asking specific questions about details of the affair that he masochistically needed to know, even though each answer was like another cut in an already deep wound, Amanda alternating between trying to defend herself and occasionally admitting small fragments of responsibility that were never genuine or complete enough. He learned that the two of them met regularly at the apartment during the day while he was working, that Tiago knew every room of the 12 million real penthouse Rodrigo had bought as a sanctuary for their marriage, that they had probably laughed together about his naivety and not noticing what was happening right under his nose. Amanda admitted she constantly deleted messages so he wouldn't find out, that she lied about where she was and who she was with, that she used the unlimited credit card money to pay for expensive dinners where she took Tiago, essentially making Rodrigo unknowingly finance his own betrayal. Each revelation was another stab, each detail building an ever clearer picture of how completely Rodrigo had been deceived and used by someone he trusted blindly. But the moment that finally shattered any remaining trace of love or hope Rodrigo might still have been holding onto in some naive corner of his heart came when he asked directly, looking into Amanda's green eyes he once thought he knew completely, "Do you love me? Do you still feel anything for me, or was all of this always just about the money and the lifestyle?" There was a vulnerability in that question Rodrigo hated to show but needed to express, one last fragile hope that maybe there was something real there that could be saved if both of them truly wanted to try. Amanda looked at him for long seconds, and Rodrigo saw a series of emotions pass through her eyes, including sadness, confusion, and perhaps something like genuine guilt for the first time in the entire conversation. Then she answered, and the brutal honesty of that answer was simultaneously the worst and the best thing she could have said. "I don't know, Rodrigo. I really don't know if what I feel is love or if I just got used to all of this, to the life you give me. And maybe that's the most honest answer I can give you right now." In that moment, hearing those words, Rodrigo finally understood with absolute and painful clarity that there was nothing left there worth fighting to save, and that the only thing left to do was take the necessary steps to permanently free himself from someone who had never truly loved him in the way he deserved to be loved. The morning after that devastating conversation, which made it crystal clear that the marriage was irreparably destroyed, Rodrigo woke up with a mental clarity he hadn't felt in weeks, as if all the emotional confusion and denial that had been draining his energy had finally dissipated, leaving only a cold, calculated determination about the next steps he needed to take. He didn't sleep at the penthouse that night, obviously. He went back to the hotel suite that had become his temporary refuge, and spent the sleepless hours not crying or mourning the loss of the relationship, but meticulously planning how he would conduct the divorce process in a way that protected his financial interests and sent a clear message that betrayal has real, painful consequences. Rodrigo wasn't the kind of man who acted on impulse or emotion when it came to important matters. His nature as a successful CEO meant he approached complex problems with refined strategy and flawless execution, and this situation would be handled with the same professional precision he applied to multi-million real negotiations. At 7 in the morning, already dressed in an impeccable Armani suit and with his face carefully composed behind a mask of absolute control that revealed nothing of the emotional storm still reverberating inside him, Rodrigo picked up his phone and made a call that would completely change the dynamic of the situation. The number he dialed belonged to Dr. Leonardo Casteller, widely recognized as the most expensive, most efficient and most feared divorce attorney in all of Brazil, a man whose reputation in separations involving large fortunes was simply legendary within the circles of the business elite. Dr. Casteller didn't take just any call that came into his office. His services were reserved exclusively for clients who not only could pay the absurdly high fees he charged, but who also represented high-profile cases where crushing victories would further cement his already impressive reputation. The lawyer was around 55 years old, with perfectly cut gray hair, wore Italian suits that cost more than economy cars, and had built a 3-decade career methodically destroying the financial ambitions of unfaithful or opportunistic spouses in divorces involving wealthy people. He was known for being absolutely ruthless in protecting his clients' assets, using every available legal loophole, every procedural strategy, every negotiation technique refined over years to ensure his clients left broken marriages with their fortunes intact and their ex-spouses receiving the absolute minimum the law allowed. Dr. Casteller took Rodrigo's call personally because he recognized the name instantly. The young prodigy CEO whose tech company was valued at 80 million reais and who frequently appeared on the covers of business magazines was exactly the kind of client the lawyer wanted. The phone conversation was direct and efficient. Rodrigo explained the situation in clear, objective terms without getting lost in unnecessary emotional details, describing the betrayal he witnessed, the apparent 3 months it had lasted, the complete lack of remorse or accountability Amanda had shown during their conversation. Dr. Casteller listened without interrupting, occasionally making brief sounds of acknowledgement that indicated he was processing each detail and already beginning to form the strategy he would use. When Rodrigo finished his account, the attorney asked the only question that truly mattered from a legal standpoint: "Did you sign a prenup when you got married?" Rodrigo's answer was a definitive yes, which made Dr. Casteller smile on the other end of the line, because prenups were the most powerful weapons in high-net-worth divorces, especially when they were well-written and included specific clauses about infidelity. Rodrigo explained that when he and Amanda got married a little over 2 years earlier, His corporate attorney at the time had absolutely insisted that a robust prenup be signed before the ceremony, not because he distrusted Amanda specifically, but simply as a standard precaution for anyone with significant assets entering a marriage. The agreement had been prepared by a specialized firm, contained extremely detailed clauses about asset division in case of separation, and included a specific section that practically eliminated any right Amanda would have to property if her infidelity were proven. Dr. Casteller scheduled an in-person meeting for that same afternoon at his office, located on the top floor of a luxury commercial building in the heart of the city's financial district. When Rodrigo arrived for the meeting, he was greeted by a team of highly professional assistants who guided him through corridors decorated with expensive artwork to a private conference room where the attorney was waiting. Dr. Casteller's office was exactly what you would expect from the most expensive lawyer in Brazil, decorated with Italian designer furniture, shelves filled with leather-bound legal books, diplomas and certifications from prestigious institutions taking up an entire wall, and a panoramic city view through floor-to-ceiling windows that alone cost more than entire apartments. The lawyer greeted Rodrigo with a firm handshake and invited him to sit in one of the leather chairs that was as comfortable as it looked expensive, then got straight to the point in a way Rodrigo deeply appreciated. "Did you bring a copy of the prenup you signed? I need to review every clause to build our attack strategy." Rodrigo handed over the document he had requested from his personal files, and Dr. Casteller spent the next 20 minutes silently reading each page, occasionally making notes on a pad with a Mont Blanc pen that probably cost more than 10,000 reis. When he finally finished reading, Dr. Casteller looked at Rodrigo with a smile that mixed professional satisfaction with something that almost resembled pity for the situation Amanda was in without realizing it yet. "This agreement," he said, tapping the document lightly with his fingers, "is a masterpiece of asset protection. Whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were doing. The infidelity clause here in Section 7 is particularly brutal in its effectiveness." He pointed to a specific paragraph and read it out loud so Rodrigo could hear again words he had completely forgotten since the day of the wedding, when he signed it without thinking much because he was too in love to imagine betrayal would ever be a real possibility. In the event of proof through irrefutable evidence of marital infidelity by the second party, all rights to the division of assets acquired during the marriage are automatically annulled, including but not limited to real estate, vehicles, investments, jewelry, or any other asset of material value. The second party waives any future claim to the first party's property and agrees to leave the marriage with only the assets originally brought into the union. Dr. Casteller paused, letting those heavy words hang in the air for a few seconds, before continuing with technical explanations of what that meant in practice. "What this clause essentially says," Dr. Casteller explained, leaning back in the leather chair and interlacing his fingers thoughtfully, "is that Amanda is entitled to absolutely nothing acquired during your marriage if we can legally prove she committed adultery. And you told me you personally witnessed her in bed with the lover, which is literally the most irrefutable evidence possible in cases of infidelity." He paused strategically, letting that information fully land before continuing. "The 12 million real penthouse? Stays with you. The 4.5 million real pink Lamborghini Urus? Goes back to you. The jewelry you bought for her over the course of the marriage, probably totaling more than $1 million in value? Technically you can demand it be returned, although it usually isn't worth the legal effort. Investments, company shares, joint accounts? All protected, and she isn't entitled to a single cent." Dr. Casteller let each item sink in, methodically building the full picture of how devastating the financial consequences of Amanda's betrayal would be. "In fact," he continued with something that almost sounded like satisfaction, "if we interpret this clause as strictly as possible, and I always interpret it as strictly as possible, Amanda leaves this marriage with only what she brought into it, which I imagine is practically nothing considering you met her when she was 23 and presumably had no significant personal assets." Rodrigo listened to all of that with a mix of relief and dark satisfaction, because even though he wasn't naturally vindictive or cruel, there was something deeply right in the idea that Amanda would face real, tangible consequences for the betrayal she had committed so carelessly. "So you're saying," Rodrigo said slowly, wanting to be absolutely certain he understood correctly, "that she gets nothing? Literally none of what we built together these years?" Dr. Casteller nodded, his face maintaining that professional expression but his eyes shining with the intellectual pleasure of a legally solid case. "Exactly nothing," he confirmed. "The agreement she voluntarily signed when you married is legally binding and was properly witnessed, which means there's practically no loophole she can exploit to challenge it. Of course she'll probably try. Spouses always try to claim they were coerced or didn't understand what they were signing, But considering she had access to independent legal counsel before signing, as documented here in the attachments, those claims will have no weight. He flipped a few pages, showing exactly where it was recorded that Amanda had consulted her own lawyer before agreeing to the prenup's terms, eliminating any future possibility of her claiming she didn't know what she was agreeing to. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with Dr. Casteller meticulously explaining every step of the divorce process he would initiate, the documents that would need to be prepared, the evidence that should be gathered to support the infidelity claim in court if Amanda decided to fight it, and above all, the communication strategy they would use to conduct negotiations while keeping Rodrigo in a position of absolute strength. The attorney made it clear his approach would be totally ruthless but always within legal boundaries, using every available tool to ensure Rodrigo came out with his assets fully intact and his reputation preserved, while Amanda faced not only financial loss but the social consequences of having publicly betrayed a husband who was liked and respected in business circles. "Don't fool yourself," Dr. Casteller said at one particularly blunt moment. "This is going to be brutal for her. When we're done, Amanda will understand very concretely that actions have consequences, and that betraying someone who literally gave you everything is one of the stupidest decisions a person can make." Rodrigo nodded, not feeling a single ounce of guilt or hesitation about what he was about to do, because Amanda had made conscious choices that led to exactly this point, and now she would face the price of those choices. When the meeting finally ended and Rodrigo stood to leave, Dr. Casteller made a point of shaking his hand firmly and saying something that resonated deeply. "Rodrigo, I've worked on hundreds of divorce cases over the course of my career, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that you're making the right choice. Men like you, who work tirelessly to build empires and who share generously with their partners, deserve loyalty at the very least. What Amanda did wasn't just romantic betrayal, it was betrayal of trust, of partnership, of everything a marriage should represent. And she's going to learn in the most painful way possible that some things can't be bought back." Rodrigo left that office not only with a solid legal plan but also with emotional validation that pursuing justice through the legal system wasn't petty revenge, but an appropriate and deserved response to someone who had so completely abused his generosity and trust. In the days that followed, Dr. Casteller and his team would work tirelessly preparing all the necessary documentation, and when the papers were finally served on Amanda, she would discover in the worst way possible that the gentle, generous man she had always known was also capable of being absolutely ruthless when necessary, and that the 80 million real empire she thought she could access through divorce was completely out of reach thanks to an agreement she had signed without reading carefully years earlier, when she still believed love was eternal and betrayal would never be a possibility. The official notice of the divorce proceedings reached Amanda exactly 1 week after that meeting between Rodrigo and Dr. Casteller, delivered by a court officer at the door of the 12 million real penthouse in a formal white envelope that looked innocent but carried inside it the financial sentence that would completely change her life. Amanda was home alone when the doorbell rang that Tuesday morning, wearing a silk robe that cost 8,000 reis and still half asleep because she had just woken up after another difficult night of restless sleep from anxiety about how the divorce would unfold. She signed for the document without fully understanding the gravity of what she was receiving, still operating under the naive assumption that the process would be relatively civil and that Rodrigo, being the gentle and generous man he had always been during the marriage, would probably split a significant portion of the assets with her even after the betrayal because he clearly still cared in some way. Amanda went back inside the penthouse, poured herself an espresso from the 15,000 real Italian machine, sat comfortably on the leather couch in the living room, and only then opened the envelope to read the documents that would shatter her perception of the situation within a few devastating minutes. The first pages were what you'd expect in any divorce filing. Legal formalities about dissolving the marriage, citations of civil codes, technical legal language that Amanda skimmed quickly because it didn't interest her much in that initial moment. But then she reached the section detailing the proposed division of assets, and that was where her heart started pounding faster with a growing mix of confusion and panic. The document methodically listed each significant item of value acquired during the marriage: the triplex penthouse valued at 12 million reis, the customized pink Lamborghini Urus worth 4.5 million, the red Ferrari worth 3,200,000, the Bentley Continental GT worth 3 million, various jewelry totaling approximately 1,300,000. High-yield investment funds totaling more than 5 million, the tech company shares worth tens of millions, joint bank accounts with balances most people wouldn't accumulate in 10 lifetimes of work. Amanda read that list feeling a kind of unconscious pride about everything that had been part of her life over the past few years, already doing rough mental calculations about how much she would receive in the split, even considering the betrayal that would surely weigh against her, but which she believed could somehow be offset through negotiation or emotional appeal. But then Amanda reached the next page, and the words written there in clear, unequivocal legal language hit her with the force of a high-speed truck slamming into a concrete wall. Based on the marital infidelity clause established in the prenuptial agreement voluntarily signed by the parties on a date prior to the marriage, and considering the irrefutable proof of adultery committed by the second party, as personally witnessed by the first party, it is hereby determined that the second party holds no rights to any of the assets, holdings, investments, or properties listed above. The division of assets is annulled in its entirety as contractually stipulated in the prenuptial document attached to this proceeding as Exhibit A. Amanda had to read that paragraph 3 times in a row because her brain refused to process the real meaning of those words. There had to be some mistake, some incorrect interpretation. It wasn't possible that she had a right to absolutely nothing after years married to Rodrigo. She kept reading frantically, her hands beginning to tremble slightly as she held the pages that suddenly felt like they weighed a ton, desperately searching for any section that spelled out what she would actually receive in the separation. But she found only more legal confirmations that there was nothing, literally nothing she could claim. As panic truly began to set in, turning that quiet morning into a waking nightmare, Amanda ran to the penthouse home office where she kept important documents in a fine wood filing cabinet that cost 20,000 reis, and began desperately searching for the copy of the prenuptial agreement she vaguely remembered signing years earlier but whose specific contents she had never properly processed. She found the document after a few minutes of frantic searching, a stapled set of official-looking pages that she definitely had not read with the attention she should have back then. Amanda vaguely remembered that day a few days before the wedding. She had been too busy finalizing details of the ceremony that would cost more than 500,000 reis, choosing imported flowers, trying on wedding dresses by famous designers, and when Rodrigo's lawyer showed up with that agreement saying it was standard procedure for marriages involving significant assets, Amanda had simply flipped through the pages quickly, signed where they told her to sign, and forgotten about it entirely because at the time she was too in love to imagine divorce would ever be a future possibility. She had even consulted her own attorney as the document required, but that consultation lasted less than 30 minutes and consisted mostly of the lawyer explaining in broad terms what a prenuptial agreement was, without diving into the most severe clauses buried in the fine print. Now, years later, sitting on the home office floor with papers scattered around and her heart beating so fast it felt like it might explode, Amanda finally read every word of the agreement with full attention, the one she had signed so carelessly. The infidelity clause was right there in Section 7, page 12, written in technical language but perfectly clear in its devastating implications. Any proof of marital cheating on her part would automatically cancel all rights to assets acquired during the marriage. There were no loopholes, no exceptions, no room for alternative interpretation. Amanda had voluntarily agreed, with her signature notarized and witnessed by 2 independent people, that if she betrayed Rodrigo, she would lose absolutely everything she hadn't brought into the marriage with her own resources. And considering that when she married him Amanda was 23, working a low-paying administrative job, and owned practically no significant assets beyond a used economy car and modest savings in a checking account, it meant she would leave the divorce essentially with nothing but the clothes on her back. The pink Lamborghini she adored and constantly posted on social media, generating envy from thousands of followers? It wasn't hers, never legally was. It was Rodrigo's property, which she only had permission to use while they were married. The stunning penthouse where she lived? It had been in Rodrigo's name since the purchase. The expensive jewelry she wore? Technically gifts that could be demanded back, even if it probably wouldn't be worth the legal effort. The reality of the situation collapsed onto Amanda with crushing weight that literally stole the air from her lungs, forcing her to take deep breaths several times to avoid a full-blown panic attack right there on the home office floor surrounded by evidence of her monumental stupidity. She had betrayed a man who had literally given her everything, who bought a 12 million real penthouse thinking he was building a home, who gifted a 4.5 million real car simply because she casually mentioned she thought it was beautiful, who worked 16 hours a day to sustain a lifestyle that allowed her to spend entire afternoons at the luxury gym where she met her lover. And she threw it all away, destroyed a marriage most women would kill to have, for what? 3 months of attention from a tan personal trainer who was probably more interested in her money, or rather in Rodrigo's money she spent, than in any genuine emotional connection. Amanda started crying right there, not the strategic tears she had used during her conversation with Rodrigo trying to manipulate the situation, but the raw, desperate sobbing of someone who finally understands the full magnitude of the mistake she made and the devastating consequences she was about to face. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and immediately called the attorney she had briefly consulted years earlier when she signed the prenup. A competent professional Amanda hoped could find some legal loophole, some way to challenge that document that now felt like a financial death sentence. The attorney answered after a few rings, and Amanda explained the situation in a rushed, desperate torrent of words, trying to describe the divorce filing, the infidelity clause, the horrifying prospect of leaving the marriage with nothing. The attorney listened patiently, asked Amanda to send digital copies of both the divorce petition and the original prenuptial agreement, and promised to review everything carefully before giving a definitive legal opinion. 2 hours later, hours Amanda spent in paralyzing anxiety alternating between obsessively rereading the documents and crying uncontrollably, the attorney called back with news that was the exact opposite of what Amanda desperately wanted to hear. "Amanda," the professional voice said on the other end with a hint of compassion, "I reviewed all the documents you sent, and I need to be completely honest with you. This prenup is legally solid. It was drafted by extremely competent professionals, and you signed it voluntarily after consulting independent counsel. The infidelity clause is perfectly legal and enforceable. There is practically no chance we can successfully challenge it in court." The attorney's words fell on Amanda like molten lead, burning away any remaining hope that there might be an exit, a way to reverse the consequences of her actions. "But there has to be something we can do," Amanda pleaded pathetically, her voice cracking with desperation. "I can't leave this marriage with nothing. I spent years by his side. That has to count for something." The attorney sighed on the other end, clearly uncomfortable having to completely destroy her client's illusions but too professional to offer false hope. "The agreement you signed specifically nullifies time-based or emotional contributions in cases of proven infidelity. And from what you told me, Rodrigo personally witnessed the affair, which is the strongest possible evidence. We can try to argue coercion or lack of understanding at the time of signing, but given that it's documented you received legal counsel before signing and the agreement was properly witnessed, those arguments are unlikely to succeed. I can represent you if you want to try, but I need to be honest that your chances of reversing this are minimal at best, and the process would be long, expensive, and emotionally devastating with a very high probability that you would lose anyway." Amanda ended the call feeling completely defeated and desperate, reality finally punching through the defenses of denial she had built. She walked through the luxurious penthouse, looking at every expensive item she had grown used to thinking of as hers. The Italian leather sofa, the art on the walls, the state-of-the-art appliances, the closets full of designer clothes, and she understood viscerally that none of it belonged to her, that it never had. It was all Rodrigo's property, which she had merely been given the temporary privilege of using while he loved her. She thought of the pink Lamborghini parked downstairs, the 250,000 real Tiffany necklace she was still wearing around her neck, the Hermes bags worth fortunes on their own, and realized all of it would have to be returned, that she would be essentially the same 23-year-old girl with nothing in her name that she had been before meeting Rodrigo. The difference now was that she had tasted a lifestyle so luxurious that going back to ordinary reality would feel impossible. She had gotten used to a standard of living only a tiny fraction of Brazilians ever experience, and all of it would be ripped away from her at once, leaving only bitter memories of what she had and lost through sheer stupidity. And worst of all, the part that cut deeper than any financial loss, was that Amanda finally understood Rodrigo had truly loved her, that everything he did was motivated by genuine love and not obligation or showmanship, and that she destroyed that love completely for 3 months of superficial attention from someone who had never truly cared about her. Tiago, in fact, had practically disappeared since the affair was discovered. He no longer responded to her messages with the same frequency, always had excuses about being busy, and Amanda began to suspect he only stayed in contact because he still thought she had access to Rodrigo's money. When she tried calling him that afternoon to vent about the divorce proceedings and the devastating clauses, Tiago answered with obvious impatience and said he was in the middle of a training session with an important client and would call her back later, a call back that never came. Amanda was alone, financially ruined, socially humiliated because news of the betrayal was already circulating through the high society circles where everyone knew her as the wife of the young, successful CEO, and facing the terrifying prospect of starting life essentially from scratch after years living as if money were infinite and consequences didn't exist. She held the prenuptial agreement in her hands, those pages she had signed without properly reading years earlier when she was naive enough to believe true love would last forever, and cried bitterly over her own stupidity and over everything she had lost because of choices she could now never undo. In the weeks that followed the delivery of the divorce papers, Rodrigo made a decision that surprised even his closest partners and advisors. He simply vanished completely from Brazilian public life, deleted all personal social media where he kept a moderate but consistent presence, and set off on a journey that blended the need for emotional distance with strategic business opportunities that had been cultivated for months. Amanda tried to contact him countless times during that period, calls that went straight to voicemail, messages marked as delivered but never read, emails that disappeared into a digital void without ever receiving a response. For all practical purposes, Rodrigo had become a ghost, present only through his attorney, Dr. Casteller, who handled the divorce with ruthless efficiency while his client was literally on the other side of the world rebuilding his life far from any painful reminder of the destroyed marriage. Mutual friends began to speculate about where Rodrigo had gone, some saying he was in deep depression isolating himself from the world, others imagining he was traveling to clear his head, but no one really knew for sure because he simply wasn't responding to anyone except the most essential part of his executive team that kept the company running during his physical absence. The truth about Rodrigo's whereabouts was both simpler and more impressive than any speculation. He was in Monaco, the European principality known as the playground of the world's billionaires, working fiercely on negotiations that would expand his company into international markets in a way that would triple its value within months. Rodrigo had decided that the best way to get over the pain of betrayal wasn't to cry over the relationship he lost, but to channel all that negative emotional energy into building something even bigger, turning rage and disappointment into fuel for an ambition that had no limits. He settled into a luxury apartment overlooking the harbor where yachts worth hundreds of millions of dollars sat anchored like expensive toys, and spent the first months working nearly 20 hours a day without breaks, without a social life, without distractions, just meeting after meeting with European investors who had shown interest in injecting massive capital into his company. Monaco was the perfect place for that kind of high-level negotiation. The principality naturally attracted the richest people on the planet, and networking there meant direct access to investment funds that moved billions of euros every year. During those 6 months of voluntary self-exile, Rodrigo went through a transformation that was both professional and personal, evolving from a successful young CEO who was emotionally wounded into an absolutely ruthless businessman whose only priority was to build an empire that would make it impossible for anyone in the future to question his worth or importance. He closed a strategic partnership with a European investment conglomerate that injected 60 million euros into his company in exchange for a minority stake in future profits. A deal negotiated with impressive skill that put his company on the international radar in a way that simply hadn't been possible before. The company's valuation exploded almost overnight, jumping from 80 million reais to 240 million practically instantly once the deal was publicly announced, and suddenly Rodrigo was no longer just a promising young CEO in the Brazilian market, but a legitimate player on the international tech scene. European business magazines began publishing features about him, this Brazilian prodigy of just 25 who was winning over traditional European investors with a combination of sharp strategic vision and flawless execution of aggressive expansion plans. But Rodrigo wasn't only working during those months in Monaco. He was also consciously rebuilding himself as a person in ways that went far beyond the professional side. He hired an elite personal trainer who worked exclusively with billionaire executives and professional athletes, someone who designed a brutal training program that completely transformed Rodrigo's physique within months. The body that had previously been simply average, neither overweight nor especially muscular because he never had time to prioritize the gym with his insane work schedule, was sculpted through daily 2-hour sessions that included heavy weightlifting, intense cardio, and even boxing sessions that served both to build muscle and to release the residual anger he still carried about the betrayal. Rodrigo went from 82 kilos distributed in a not particularly impressive way to 88 kilos of defined muscle that completely changed the way clothes fell on his body, shifting his look from ordinary businessman to someone who could easily be on the cover of men's fashion magazines. He also invested in style consulting with one of the most expensive personal stylists in Europe, someone who helped him refine his entire wardrobe, swapping generic corporate suits for ultra-premium made-to-measure pieces from Italian brands that individually cost more than economy cars. His hair was cut by one of Monaco's most renowned barbers, a professional who served only high-level clientele, charged 500 euros per cut, and delivered results that made the difference between looking merely well-groomed and looking like he stepped out of a men's fashion photo shoot. Rodrigo grew a light but perfectly shaped beard that added years of maturity and sophistication to his still young face, and started wearing strategic accessories that communicated success without being overly flashy, like a Patek Philippe Nautilus worth 2 million reais. instantly recognized by anyone familiar with luxury watches as one of the most desired and hardest to acquire models on the planet. The visual transformation was impressive enough that people who knew him before would have trouble recognizing him right away, but what truly changed on a deeper level was the energy Rodrigo now projected. An unshakable confidence that didn't come from arrogance, but from someone who had gone through the emotional fire of betrayal and come out the other side stronger, more focused, and more determined to prove he was worth far more than anyone who betrayed him ever deserved. Rodrigo also used that time in Monaco to form strategic social connections with other successful entrepreneurs, attending exclusive events where tickets cost fortunes and the guest list read like a who's who of global billionaires. He regularly dined at Michelin-starred restaurants where a meal cost more than €1,000 per person, not out of vanity, but because those were the places where real deals happened, where partnerships were built over glasses of wine that cost more than entire monthly salaries. He bought a permanent apartment in Monaco, not only as an investment but as a symbolic statement that he had earned a place in that international elite world most Brazilians only knew through documentaries or magazines. The apartment overlooked the Mediterranean and cost €8 million paid in cash without financing, because by then Rodrigo's personal net worth had easily surpassed 300 million reais considering his equity in a company valued at 240 million plus various high-yield investments. He was officially in the category of people for whom money had stopped being a real concern and had become simply a tool to build the kind of life he wanted without any material limits. Throughout those 6 months, Amanda had no idea about any of it happening across the Atlantic. She only knew Rodrigo had completely disappeared, that the divorce continued advancing through attorneys without any direct contact between them, and that her own life was collapsing in increasingly humiliating ways as the financial consequences of her betrayal took hold. Amanda was forced to leave the 12 million real penthouse because it was only in Rodrigo's name and she had no legal right to remain there after the official separation, so she moved into a tiny rented apartment in a middle-class neighborhood that felt absolutely miserable compared to the luxury she had grown used to. The pink Lamborghini was repossessed by court order and returned to Rodrigo, a particularly humiliating moment when the officer came to take the car she loved and posted constantly on social media as if it were truly hers. The most expensive jewelry was demanded back through legal proceedings, and although Amanda tried to argue that gifts shouldn't be returned, Rodrigo's attorney produced documentation showing that many of those items had been purchased explicitly as marital assets, rather than personal gifts, a technical legal distinction that allowed recovery. The high society friends who used to include Amanda in every exclusive event and lunches at expensive restaurants began distancing themselves, some out of genuine discomfort with the affair they considered morally indefensible. Others simply because Amanda no longer had the status of being a millionaire CEO's wife and therefore was no longer useful for networking. Tiago, predictably, disappeared completely as soon as it became clear Amanda would have no access to any part of Rodrigo's fortune. His messages grew more and more spaced out until they stopped entirely, and when she finally managed to confront him in person at the gym, he was brutally honest. He had never felt anything real for her and had only been interested in the luxurious lifestyle she provided with her husband's money. It was a devastating conversation that finally opened Amanda's eyes completely to how much she had been used and manipulated, how she had thrown away a real marriage with someone who genuinely loved her for the illusion of romance with someone who saw her only as a doorway to easy money and effortless luxury. Amanda was alone, financially and emotionally broken, living in a 60-square-meter apartment with 3,000 reais in monthly rent she could barely afford as her savings rapidly vanished, with absolutely no news of Rodrigo beyond cold legal documents delivered through attorneys. And then, 6 months after disappearing completely, Rodrigo finally returned to Brazil, but not in the discreet way Amanda might have expected or feared. He returned like an international business star, timing his arrival strategically to coincide with the release of the Forbes Brazil issue that featured him on the cover with the headline, "The youngest CEO to reach a $1 billion valuation, How Rodrigo Mendes Won Over European Investors." The cover story was a 20-page feature detailing his impressive entrepreneurial journey, from founding the company at 22 to closing the mega deal with the European conglomerate that tripled the company's value, presenting Rodrigo as a shining example of Brazilian entrepreneurship successfully competing in the international market. The photos that accompanied the feature showed Rodrigo completely transformed, unrecognizable compared to the man Amanda had betrayed 6 months earlier, now muscular and elegant in a 40,000 real Armani suit with the 2 million real Patek Philippe on his wrist, photographed in his Monaco apartment with yachts in the background, the visual embodiment of absolute success and unquestionable power. Amanda saw that magazine at a newsstand as she casually walked down the street, and felt her heart literally stop for a second when she recognized the face on the cover, that handsome, powerful man who barely looked like the same person she had known, and the emotional impact of realizing how much he had evolved while she sank was devastating in a way no amount of mental preparation could have softened. Rodrigo's return to Brazil wasn't just a physical return to the country, it was a public and unequivocal declaration that he had not only survived the devastating betrayal but had used that pain as fuel for a transformation so complete and impressive that it made it clear to anyone watching that Amanda had possibly made the most expensive and stupid mistake a person could make. He landed at São Paulo's International Airport on a first-class flight straight from Monaco, and unlike previous trips where he usually blended in among other passengers, this time there were business press photographers waiting specifically for him because the Forbes feature had generated so much buzz in corporate circles that Rodrigo instantly became a celebrity in Brazil's business world. Cameras captured every detail of his arrival. The dark gray custom-made suit that probably cost more than 50,000 reais and fell over his now muscular body like it had been painted directly onto his skin, the Tom Ford sunglasses that added an air of sophisticated mystery, the upright, confident posture of someone who knew exactly what he was worth and no longer had any insecurity about his place in the world. Rodrigo didn't smile for the cameras or strike elaborate poses, he simply walked with that quiet confidence that's far more impressive than any loud display, gave the photographers a polite wave, and stepped into the armored limousine waiting for him, a uniformed private driver holding the door open. In the days that followed his return, Rodrigo was bombarded with invitations for TV interviews, business podcasts, corporate events where they wanted him to speak about his impressive entrepreneurial journey, partnership offers that arrived daily from companies eager to attach themselves to his name, which now carried considerable international weight. He selectively accepted only the most prestigious invitations, the ones that would add even more value to the personal brand he was building, and every public appearance was carefully orchestrated to project the image of a CEO who hadn't just recovered from a personal crisis but had emerged 10 times stronger. During one particularly widely watched interview on a major morning show, when the host inevitably asked about the divorce rumors circulating in social columns, Rodrigo answered with a diplomacy that revealed no bitterness but made it clear he had fully moved past that chapter. Sometimes things don't work out the way we expected, and that's okay. I chose to focus my energy on building something bigger than any single relationship, and the results speak for themselves. My company tripled in value in the last few months. We closed international partnerships that would have seemed impossible a year ago, and I'm genuinely happy with the direction my professional and personal life are taking. The Forbes Brazil feature went viral on social media, circulating widely not only within business circles but also among the general public that loves stories of resilience and success, and Rodrigo gained hundreds of thousands of new followers within days of reactivating his accounts, which had been dormant during the months in Monaco. But the content he posted now was completely different from what he used to share before. There were no more casual photos or personal updates about domestic life. Everything was carefully curated to show only the business-focused and sophisticated side of his life. Photos and high-level meetings with international investors, images of him signing multi-million-dollar contracts in luxurious offices, short videos offering business advice to young entrepreneurs, stories showing an intense work routine interspersed with sessions with his private trainer or dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. All of it building a visual narrative of someone living the full life he deserved. The engagement was insane. Every post drew tens of thousands of likes and thousands of comments from people admiring his transformation, many explicitly mentioning that they knew the betrayal story and how inspiring it was to see him make such a spectacular comeback. Amanda watched all of it happen in real time through the same phone screen she once used to post her own luxury life. But now the situation was completely reversed and she was the powerless spectator watching her ex-husband reach heights she never imagined possible while her own life sank deeper and deeper. She was sprawled on the tiny sofa in the 60-square-meter rented apartment, wearing cheap lounge clothes from budget stores because she could no longer afford the luxury brands she used to wear. Her hair pulled into a messy bun without any professional treatments because the expensive salons she frequented were completely out of reach in the tight budget that now defined her reality. Amanda obsessively scrolled through Rodrigo's photo feed, zooming in on every image, trying to process the absurd transformation he had undergone, that muscular, elegant man who barely looked like the same person she had known and married years earlier. She read the comments from beautiful, successful women openly praising him, leaving suggestive emojis, asking if he was single, and Amanda felt a toxic mix of devastating jealousy and crushing regret eating her alive because that incredible man everyone wanted had once been completely hers. He had loved her with total intensity and she threw it all straight into the trash. The most painful moment came when Amanda was standing in a supermarket line buying basic, cheap items because she needed to stretch the last scraps of savings before seriously having to consider going back to administrative jobs that paid average salaries, and she saw Forbes on the rack near the register. The cover showed Rodrigo in all his transformed glory, that confident smile and piercing look that communicated absolute power and unquestionable success, and Amanda simply couldn't resist even though she knew reading that story would be pure emotional self-punishment. She grabbed the magazine with slightly trembling hands, paid the 12 reis along with her modest groceries, and went back to the apartment, where she spent the next 2 hours reading every word of the 20-page feature detailing Rodrigo's business journey in depth. The magazine described how he had turned a promising Brazilian startup into a respected international player, how he had impressed European investors traditionally skeptical of entrepreneurs from emerging countries, how he was being compared to other phenomenal young CEOs who built billion-dollar empires before 30. There were quotes from investors and business partners praising his strategic vision, unmatched work ethic and ability to execute complex plans with surgical precision, and every compliment felt like a knife sliding into Amanda's heart because she had once had privileged access to that extraordinary man and chose to betray him. But the paragraph that truly destroyed Amanda, the one that made her sob uncontrollably alone on the cheap sofa in the tiny apartment, was when the article briefly mentioned Rodrigo's personal life and subtly touched on the recent divorce. When asked how he maintains balance between a demanding professional life and his personal life, Rodrigo smiles enigmatically and says he's gone through a significant reordering of priorities recently. Sometimes you have to go through difficult experiences to really understand what makes you happy and what's just a distraction from your true potential. I'm focused now on building something no one can take from me, something that doesn't depend on another person to have value. My company, my achievements, my personal evolution, those things are permanent in a way relationships aren't always. He doesn't elaborate further, but close friends mention Rodrigo went through a recent divorce that, instead of destroying him as it might have done to many in his position, seems to have served as a catalyst for renewed ambition and laser focus on growth both professionally and personally. He turned pain into power, says a partner who asked to remain anonymous, and the result is someone practically unstoppable now. Amanda read and reread that paragraph probably 50 times, each pass bringing a new wave of regret because she had been the cause of that difficult experience. She had been the person who tried to break him and ended up giving him the fuel to become even more incredible. The following days were constant torture for Amanda because Rodrigo was literally everywhere, impossible to avoid even if she wanted to. He gave a keynote at a technology conference broadcast live and watched by hundreds of thousands of people, where he spoke about international expansion strategies for Brazilian startups and received a 5-minute standing ovation at the end, which made Amanda cry in frustration because she should have been there beside him sharing that glory, but instead she was watching alone through a phone with a cracked screen she couldn't afford to fix. He was interviewed on an extremely popular podcast where he shared fascinating details about the negotiations in Monaco, and Amanda listened to every second of that 3-hour episode even though it was pure masochism, just to hear his voice she hadn't heard in person for months. Rodrigo's social media kept growing exponentially. He had become a kind of inspirational icon for young entrepreneurs who saw him as proof that it was possible to build something extraordinary even coming from a country where the business environment was notoriously difficult, and thousands of people commented daily about how he was not only professionally talented but also ridiculously handsome after the physical transformation he had undergone. And then something happened that Amanda secretly feared but was inevitable given how desirable Rodrigo had become. Photos started circulating of him at social events accompanied by beautiful, successful women, professional models, young businesswomen, influencers with millions of followers, all clearly eager to capture the attention of the most coveted CEO of the moment. The photos weren't explicit or compromising. Rodrigo always maintained a respectful, distant posture that suggested he wasn't in a serious relationship yet, but the simple fact of seeing him surrounded by women who were everything Amanda once was and much more made her feel a mix of irrational jealousy and consuming envy. She obsessively stalked the social media accounts of every woman who appeared in pictures with Rodrigo, cruelly comparing her own deteriorated appearance after months of stress and depression with those women who looked impeccable and confident. And with every comparison Amanda sank deeper into a spiral of self-hatred for having destroyed her life so completely and irreversibly. Rodrigo was clearly moving on in spectacular fashion, building not only a business empire but also a vibrant social life surrounded by high-caliber people, while Amanda was trapped in a tiny apartment obsessively replaying every moment when she could have made different choices and wouldn't have ended up in this miserable situation where the luxurious past felt more and more like a distant dream that maybe never really happened. It took a full 3 months after Rodrigo returned to the United States, transformed into an improved version of himself in every possible sense, for Amanda to finally gather enough courage to do what she had been obsessively considering during all those sleepless nights in the tiny apartment where she now lived. The idea had formed gradually in her tormented mind, fueled by a toxic combination of growing financial desperation, devastating emotional regret, and a pathetic, irrational hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a microscopic chance of winning Rodrigo back, or at least securing some kind of more generous financial arrangement from him that could ease the miserable situation she found herself in. Amanda knew rationally that it was a terrible idea, that showing up unannounced at his office after everything she had done would probably result only in further humiliation. But the combination of watching her savings disappear rapidly, facing the very real prospect of having to return to low-paying jobs, and helplessly witnessing Rodrigo reach levels of success she had never imagined possible eventually shattered whatever remnants of dignity or common sense she still possessed. So on a Thursday morning, Amanda woke up early for the first time in months, took a long shower trying to make herself look minimally presentable, put on one of the last designer dresses she still owned and had not yet had to sell to pay bills, applied makeup with trembling hands in an attempt to hide the obvious signs of months of stress and depression, and left the apartment heading toward the luxury commercial building in the heart of the financial district where Rodrigo's company office was located. The trip there was made by public transportation because Amanda obviously no longer had her own car since the pink Lamborghini had been repossessed, and every minute of that bus ride, packed with ordinary workers heading to regular jobs, was a painful reminder of how drastically her life had changed. She, who used to wake up late and casually choose which of her 15 luxury cars she would use that day, was now squeezed into a smelly bus holding a cheap counterfeit handbag she had bought at a popular store because she could no longer afford the authentic Hermès bags that once filled her closet. When she finally arrived at the building where Rodrigo's office was located, a glass and steel skyscraper that radiated success and power from every inch of its modern architecture, Amanda had to pause on the sidewalk for a few minutes, taking deep breaths and trying to summon the courage to actually go inside and do what she had planned. The building's reception area was intimidating, with uniformed security guards and an electronic turnstile system that required identification or prior authorization. But Amanda managed to convince the receptionist that she urgently needed to speak with Rodrigo about important personal matters. After a few minutes of uncomfortable negotiation in which she practically had to beg, the receptionist called his executive floor assistant to ask whether there was any possibility of receiving an unscheduled visitor. The response came quickly and was exactly what Amanda feared but secretly hoped would not happen. Rodrigo was not available for unscheduled visits, and she should make an appointment through the appropriate channels if she wanted to discuss anything, preferably through the lawyers, as all communications related to the divorce had been handled up to that point. But Amanda had not traveled all the way there on public transportation and gathered all that courage just to accept a polite refusal, so she did something that should probably have deeply embarrassed her but that desperation made seem reasonable. She started crying right there in the reception area, genuine tears of frustration and despair streaming down her carefully applied makeup, and begged the receptionist to please call again and explain that it was an emergency, that she really needed to speak with Rodrigo for just 5 minutes, that she would not leave until she saw him. The scene was embarrassing enough that the receptionist, clearly uncomfortable with the unusual situation, called the executive floor again, and this time Rodrigo's assistant consulted directly with him about what to do with that crying ex-wife in the lobby who refused to leave. There was a long pause on the line while the assistant apparently spoke with Rodrigo, and Amanda stood there with her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of her chest, oscillating between hope that he would agree to see her and terror at what would happen if she actually gained access to that office. Finally, the receptionist hung up and said with an expression that mixed professionalism with something that looked like pity, "Mr. Mendez will see you, but he made it clear that he only has 10 minutes before an important meeting with international investors. Take the elevator to the 25th floor, his assistant will receive you there." Amanda thanked her profusely, quickly wiped the tears from her face in an attempt to compose herself, and stepped into the elevator with legs trembling so badly that she had to lean against the mirrored wall during the ride up. When the doors opened on the 25th floor, she was greeted by an impeccably dressed executive assistant who led her through elegantly decorated corridors to a private conference room where Rodrigo was waiting, and for the first time in months Amanda saw in person the man who had been her husband, now transformed into something almost unrecognizable compared to the person she had once known. Rodrigo was standing near the panoramic window that offered a spectacular view of the city, wearing a dark gray Armani suit that probably cost around 60,000 reais and fit perfectly over his now muscular body, a 2 million real Patek Philippe watch discreetly gleaming on his wrist, his hair perfectly cut and his beard groomed with professional precision. Everything about him communicating absolute power and unshakable success. When he turned to look at Amanda entering the room, the expression on his face was one of complete emotional indifference, as if she were just another person who needed a few minutes of his attention and not the woman with whom he had shared years of his life and planned to build a future. "Amanda," he said in a calm, controlled voice that revealed absolutely no emotion. "My assistant said you're here claiming there's an emergency. You have 10 minutes because after that I have a video call with investors in Singapore that cannot be rescheduled. What exactly do you need?" The absolute coldness in his voice, so different from the warm way Rodrigo used to speak to her, made Amanda feel a tightness in her chest that almost prevented her from breathing properly for a few seconds. Amanda tried to begin with some elaborate explanation about how she had reflected deeply on everything that had happened, how she recognized the monumental mistakes she had made, how she should never have betrayed someone who had been so incredible to her, but the words came out rushed and confused because she was too nervous and also because Rodrigo simply stood there watching her with that expression of polite boredom that made it clear he was not even remotely interested in belated apologies or emotional justifications. So Amanda changed strategy, going straight to the point in a way that should probably have embarrassed her but that desperation made necessary. "Rodrigo, I know I ruined everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm going through serious financial difficulties and I thought maybe you could consider adjusting the terms of the divorce to give me some financial support, something that would at least allow me to live with basic dignity while I try to rebuild my life." She paused, waiting for some reaction from him, but Rodrigo remained completely impassive, so Amanda continued, growing more desperate with every word. "I still love you, Rodrigo. I know I didn't show it properly when we were together, but these months alone made me realize how much you meant to me, how much I threw away something precious that I never should have risked losing." Rodrigo's response came after a few seconds of heavy silence that felt like an eternity, and each word was delivered with a cold clarity that left no room for alternative interpretation or lingering hope. "Amanda, let me be absolutely clear about something you apparently still haven't fully understood. We are over. There is no possibility of reconciliation. There is no chance that I will reconsider the terms of the divorce that were established based on a prenuptial agreement you signed voluntarily, and there is absolutely no part of me that still feels anything romantic for you beyond mild indifference mixed with relief at having discovered your true nature before wasting even more time of my life." He paused, letting those heavy words sink in completely before continuing. "You say you love me, but love is not a word you throw around casually after betraying someone for months in his bed, with his money, in his house. Genuine love does not work that way. What you're feeling now is not love for me, it's regret over the consequences of your actions, nostalgia for the luxurious lifestyle you lost, and financial desperation disguised as romantic feeling." Rodrigo walked over to the conference table and sat down, gesturing politely for Amanda to do the same, but his posture was that of a businessman conducting an uninteresting meeting, not an ex-husband having an emotional conversation with his ex-wife. "As for your financial difficulties," he continued in that same professional, distant tone, "that is not my problem. You made conscious choices that led exactly to this situation. You chose to betray my trust, you chose to sign a prenuptial agreement without properly reading it, you chose to prioritize 3 months of attention from a personal trainer over years of partnership with me. Those were your choices, Amanda, and now you are facing the natural consequences of those choices. I have no legal or moral obligation to ease your financial discomfort." Amanda tried to interrupt, starting to cry again and beg in a way that was humiliating even for her to witness from the outside, but Rodrigo raised a hand asking for silence and continued relentlessly. "You had everything, literally everything that most people would spend their entire lives working and never manage to achieve. A 12 million real penthouse. Cars totaling more than 10 million. Unlimited credit cards. International travel by private jet. Extremely expensive jewelry. I gave you all of that with an open heart because I genuinely loved you. And you threw it all in the trash." The silence that followed was absolutely devastating for Amanda, who finally understood with brutal clarity that there was absolutely no possibility of reversing the situation, that Rodrigo had moved on so completely that she was now literally irrelevant in his life. She tried one more time, her voice coming out weak and broken. "Please, Rodrigo, at least help me get a job at your company, anything. I can work as an administrative assistant or in any position. I just need a chance to start over." The suggestion was so pathetic, so desperate, that even Amanda felt ashamed of having spoken it aloud, but desperation had driven her to a point where dignity was simply no longer a relevant consideration. Rodrigo looked at her with an expression that could be interpreted as pity or perhaps just boredom, then deliberately glanced at the expensive watch on his wrist, indicating that the 10 minutes he had granted were rapidly coming to an end. "No," he said simply, without elaborating or softening the rejection with unnecessary explanations. Then he stood up from the chair, walked to the door of the conference room, and opened it politely, indicating that the conversation was completely over. Amanda remained seated for a few more seconds in a state of absolute shock, slowly processing that this was really it, that there would be no magical reconciliation or dramatic turnaround where Rodrigo suddenly forgave everything and rescued her from the miserable situation she was in. She finally stood up on unsteady legs, walked toward the door where Rodrigo waited patiently for her to leave, and as she passed him she tried one last time to touch his arm in a gesture of basic human connection. But Rodrigo subtly stepped away, avoiding contact as if she were contaminated with something contagious. It was in that small but definitive movement that Amanda finally broke completely, her last emotional defenses collapsing as she began to cry uncontrollably right there in the office corridor, no longer caring that employees were passing by and witnessing the embarrassing scene. Rodrigo signaled discreetly to his assistant and said in a professional voice that revealed no trace of emotion, "Please escort the lady to the exit and make sure she has no difficulty leaving the building. And note at reception that she is no longer to be granted access to this floor without explicit prior authorization." Then he looked at Amanda one last time, and in that look there was only complete indifference, as if she were an inconvenient stranger rather than someone he had once loved deeply, and said the final words that would destroy her for months to come. "Take care of your life, Amanda. I've already taken care of mine." With that, he simply returned to his office, closing the door behind him, leaving Amanda to be gently but firmly escorted by the assistant to the elevator while other employees watched curiously as the crying woman was let out like an unwanted intruder, the humiliation being absolutely complete and public in a way Amanda would never forget. The months that followed that public and devastating humiliation at Rodrigo's office were possibly the darkest of Amanda's entire life, a period of emotional and financial free fall in which each day seemed worse than the one before and any hope of improvement simply no longer existed on the visible horizon. The tiny 60-square-meter apartment she rented for 3,000 reais a month, which already felt miserable compared to the 12 million real triplex penthouse she used to live in, eventually became unsustainable when her savings finally ran out completely and she could no longer pay the overdue rent that kept piling up month after month. The property owner, initially understanding of the difficult situation Amanda was clearly facing, eventually lost patience after the third consecutive month of late payment and initiated eviction proceedings that forced Amanda to leave that apartment and move into something even smaller and cheaper in a significantly worse neighborhood. The new place was a one-bedroom apartment of only 35 square meters in an old building with no doorman or security, with water damage in the walls that left ugly mold stains, windows that didn't close properly and let the constant street noise pour in unfiltered and old, broken furniture that came with the unit because Amanda had no money to buy anything better. The rent was 1,500 reais, half of what she had paid before, but even so it represented an enormous sacrifice considering that she now had to work just to be able to afford even that modest amount. Amanda had finally accepted the brutal reality that she would have to return to work for the first time in years, completely abandoning the lifestyle in which she woke up without an alarm clock and spent her days choosing how to spend endless money on leisure activities. She sent out resumes to dozens of companies, but the job market was not kind to someone with a massive gap in her work history and no particularly valuable specialized skills to offer. The few interviews she managed to get were humiliating experiences in which human resources managers looked at her resume with barely concealed skepticism, trying to understand why a 28-year-old woman had spent the last several years completely outside the workforce, and Amanda had to invent vague excuses about having dedicated herself to personal projects because the real truth, that she had been the pampered wife of a millionaire CEO and didn't need to work, sounded even more pathetic when spoken out loud. She eventually landed a job as a sales clerk at a popular mall clothing store, earning 1.5 times the minimum wage, which barely covered rent and basic survival expenses, working 8 hours a day on her feet dealing with often rude customers and managers who treated her as completely replaceable because, well, she was completely replaceable in that context. The high society friends who used to include Amanda in every exclusive event and expensive lunch had completely disappeared from her life. None of them responded anymore to the messages she occasionally sent trying to maintain some form of contact, and Amanda understood perfectly why, even though it hurt to admit it. She no longer had anything to offer that social circle. She no longer had the status of a millionaire CEO's wife, no longer had the money to frequent the same restaurants and events, no longer had anything interesting happening in her life worth sharing in the superficial conversations that characterized those friendships based primarily on social convenience. She had been discarded from that world as easily as a fashion trend that went out of style, simply ceased to exist for those people who once pretended to like her. Amanda tried a few times to attend public events where she knew her former friends would be present, but the receptions were cold enough to make it clear she was no longer welcome. Looks of pity mixed with barely disguised satisfaction at her downfall, conversations that died abruptly when she approached as if her presence were contaminating, and after a few particularly humiliating experiences, Amanda finally understood that that chapter of her life had ended irreversibly and that trying to cling to it only prolonged the pain. Tiago, the tan personal trainer who had been so attentive and interested during the 3-month affair and whom Amanda naively believed truly cared about her, had completely disappeared from her life the exact moment it became clear there would be no more indirect access to Rodrigo's fortune. Amanda's messages to him went unanswered for days until they were eventually replied to with generic excuses about being too busy with work. Her calls went straight to voicemail, and when she finally managed to run into him in person at the gym where they had met and confronted him about why he had vanished so completely, Tiago was brutally honest in a way that destroyed any remaining illusion Amanda still held about that relationship. "Look, Amanda, I'll be straight with you because I think you deserve honesty after everything. I was never really in love with you. It was fun while it lasted, you were attractive and had access to a lifestyle I could never have on my own, but now that you don't have any of that anymore it doesn't make sense for us to continue. I'm already seeing someone else, actually the wife of a real estate businessman who has a lot more money than your ex-husband ever had." The casual cruelty of those words, the way Tiago shamelessly revealed that he had used her simply as access to luxury and status, left Amanda feeling a physical nausea that lingered for days. While Amanda's life was collapsing in increasingly devastating and irreversible ways, Rodrigo continued his unstoppable upward trajectory, reaching levels of success that seemed almost unreal compared to where he had been just a year earlier. His company, now valued at an impressive 240 million reais and backed by robust investment from European partners, was aggressively expanding into international markets, opening offices in 3 different countries and hiring some of the best talent in the global technology industry. Rodrigo was named to prestigious lists of the most influential young entrepreneurs not only in Brazil but across all of Latin America, received invitations to speak at international conferences alongside established billionaire CEOs, and began to be mentioned in specialized articles as one of the most promising entrepreneurs of his generation, with real potential to build one of the next major global technology companies. His personal net worth had grown exponentially along with the company's value, and Rodrigo was now officially classified as a billionaire in reais, considering his shares in the company along with diverse investments in high-yield funds and luxury properties both in Brazil and abroad. But Rodrigo's professional success was only part of the complete transformation he had undergone, because his personal life had also evolved in ways that clearly demonstrated he had fully overcome the trauma of the betrayal and was building something far better than the destroyed marriage with Amanda ever was. He purchased a stunning mansion in an ultra-exclusive gated community on the outskirts of the city, a 1,200-square-meter property with 6 suites, a private movie theater, a fully equipped gym, a spa with sauna and hot tub, an infinity pool, a climate-controlled wine cellar for rare wines, a 12-car garage, and a landscaped garden that looked like it belonged in a luxury architecture magazine, all valued at 25 million reais paid in cash with no need for financing. His car collection had grown, now including not only the vehicles he already owned but also impressive additions such as a 2.8 million real Porsche 911 Turbo S, a 1.2 million real Range Rover Sport SVR, and even a vibrant orange McLaren 720S worth 3.5 million reais that he occasionally drove on weekends to elite business social events. Rodrigo had also acquired that permanent apartment in Monaco for 8 million euros, as well as a penthouse in Miami Beach valued at $6 million that he used when he needed to be in the United States for business meetings, building an international real estate portfolio that most people would not accumulate in 10 lifetimes of hard work. Rodrigo's social life had become equally impressive. He was regularly photographed at charity galas alongside celebrities and other billionaire businessmen, frequently dined at Michelin-starred restaurants where a single meal could easily cost 5,000 reais per person, traveled to exotic destinations whenever he had a few free days in his impossible schedule, and was constantly seen accompanied by absolutely stunning women who were everything Amanda once tried to be but with real substance behind the appearance. Professional models who walked runways in Paris and Milan, successful businesswomen who had built their own multimillion-dollar companies, famous soap opera actresses, digital influencers with millions of engaged followers, all clearly interested in capturing the attention of the most coveted CEO of the moment. Yet Rodrigo maintained a strategic posture of limited emotional availability, never committing seriously to anyone but also never being alone. Gap in her work history and no particularly valuable specialized skills to offer. The few interviews she managed to get were humiliating experiences in which human resources managers looked at her resume with barely concealed skepticism, trying to understand why a 28-year-old woman had spent the last several years completely outside the workforce, and Amanda had to invent vague excuses about having dedicated herself to personal projects because the real truth, that she had been the pampered wife of a millionaire CEO and didn't need to work, sounded even more pathetic when spoken out loud. She eventually landed a job as a sales clerk at a popular mall clothing store, earning 1.5 times the minimum wage, which barely covered rent and basic survival expenses, working 8 hours a day on her feet dealing with often rude customers and managers who treated her as completely replaceable because, well, she was completely replaceable in that context. The high society friends who used to include Amanda in every exclusive event and expensive lunch had completely disappeared from her life. None of them responded anymore to the messages she occasionally sent trying to maintain some form of contact, and Amanda understood perfectly why, even though it hurt to admit it. She no longer had anything to offer that social circle. She no longer had the status of a millionaire CEO's wife, no longer had the money to frequent the same restaurants and events, no longer had anything interesting happening in her life worth sharing in the superficial conversations that characterized those friendships based primarily on social convenience. She had been discarded from that world as easily as a fashion trend that went out of style, simply ceased to exist for those people who once pretended to like her. Amanda tried a few times to attend public events where she knew her former friends would be present, but the receptions were cold enough to make it clear she was no longer welcome, looks of pity mixed with barely disguised satisfaction at her downfall, conversations that died abruptly when she approached as if her presence were contaminating, and after a few particularly humiliating experiences Amanda finally understood that that chapter of her life had ended irreversibly and that trying to cling to it only prolonged the pain. Tiago, the tan personal trainer who had been so attentive and interested during the 3-month affair and whom Amanda naively believed truly cared about her, had completely disappeared from her life the exact moment it became clear there would be no more indirect access to Rodrigo's fortune. Amanda's messages to him went unanswered for days until they were eventually replied to with generic excuses about being too busy with work. Her calls went straight to voicemail, and when she finally managed to run into him in person at the gym where they had met and confronted him about why he had vanished so completely, Tiago was brutally honest in a way that destroyed any remaining illusion Amanda still held about that relationship. "Look, Amanda, I'll be straight with you because I think you deserve honesty after everything. I was never really in love with you. It was fun while it lasted, you were attractive and had access to a lifestyle I could never have on my own, but now that you don't have any of that anymore it doesn't make sense for us to continue. I'm already seeing someone else, actually the wife of a real estate businessman who has a lot more money than your ex-husband ever had." The casual cruelty of those words, the way Tiago shamelessly revealed that he had used her simply as access to luxury and status, left Amanda feeling a physical nausea that lingered for days. While Amanda's life was collapsing in increasingly devastating and irreversible ways, Rodrigo continued his unstoppable upward trajectory, reaching levels of success that seemed almost unreal compared to where he had been just a year earlier. His company, now valued at an impressive 240 million reais and backed by robust investment from European partners, was aggressively expanding into international markets, opening offices in 3 different countries and hiring some of the best talent in the global technology industry. Rodrigo was named to prestigious lists of the most influential young entrepreneurs not only in Brazil but across all of Latin America, received invitations to speak at international conferences alongside established billionaire CEOs, and began to be mentioned in specialized articles as one of the most promising entrepreneurs of his generation, with real potential to build one of the next major global technology companies. His personal net worth had grown exponentially along with the company's value, and Rodrigo was now officially classified as a billionaire in reais, considering his shares in the company along with diverse investments in high-yield funds and luxury properties both in Brazil and abroad. But Rodrigo's professional success was only part of the complete transformation he had undergone, because his personal life had also evolved in ways that clearly demonstrated he had fully overcome the trauma of the betrayal and was building something far better than the destroyed marriage with Amanda ever was. He purchased a stunning mansion in an ultra-exclusive gated community on the outskirts of the city, a 1,200 square meter property with 6 suites, a private movie theater, a fully equipped gym, a spa with sauna and hot tub, an infinity pool, a climate-controlled wine cellar for rare wines, a 12-car garage, and a landscaped garden that looked like it belonged in a luxury architecture magazine. All valued at 25 million reais paid in cash with no need for financing. His car collection had grown, now including not only the vehicles he already owned but also impressive additions such as a 2.8 million real Porsche 911 Turbo S, a 1.2 million real Range Rover Sport SVR, and even a vibrant orange McLaren 720S worth 3.5 million reais that he occasionally drove on weekends to elite business social events. Rodrigo had also acquired that permanent apartment in Monaco for 8 million euros, as well as a penthouse in Miami Beach valued at $6 million that he used when he needed to be in the United States for business meetings, building an international real estate portfolio that most people would not accumulate in 10 lifetimes of hard work. Rodrigo's social life had become equally impressive. He was regularly photographed at charity galas alongside celebrities and other billionaire businessmen, frequently dined at Michelin-starred restaurants where a single meal could easily cost 5,000 reais per person, traveled to exotic destinations whenever he had a few free days in his impossible schedule, and was constantly seen accompanied by absolutely stunning women who were everything Amanda once tried to be but with real substance behind the appearance. Professional models who walked runways in Paris and Milan, successful businesswomen who had built their own multimillion-dollar companies, famous soap opera actresses, digital influencers with millions of engaged followers, all clearly interested in capturing the attention of the most coveted CEO of the moment. Yet Rodrigo maintained a strategic posture of limited emotional availability, never committing seriously to anyone but also never being alone, appearing to genuinely enjoy his successful single phase with no hurry at all to enter another serious relationship after the devastating betrayal he had suffered. His social media presence continued to grow exponentially, surpassing the 1 million follower mark, with followers obsessively tracking every update of his life. The content Rodrigo posted was a carefully curated mix of professional achievements, sophisticated luxury moments, and occasional inspirational reflections on resilience and personal growth that generated hundreds of thousands of likes and thousands of admiring comments. Amanda watched all of this unfold in real time through the same cracked phone screen she could no longer afford to fix, compulsively stalking Rodrigo's social media even though she knew that every view only deepened the depression that was already clinically concerning. She saw photos of him in the new mansion that made the 12 million real penthouse seem modest by comparison, posts showing dinners at restaurants where a single meal cost more than her monthly salary, stories of international trips to paradise destinations she would never again have the money to visit, videos of him driving cars worth tens of millions of reais, images of him at social events surrounded by beautiful, successful people who represented everything she had lost access to by betraying him. Each post was another knife in Amanda's already shattered heart, a brutal visual reminder that Rodrigo had moved on so spectacularly that she had become completely irrelevant, a forgotten footnote in his success story, the ex-wife who made the monumental mistake of betraying someone destined for greatness and paid the highest possible price for that betrayal. Amanda cried often alone in the tiny apartment after spending 8 hours on her feet working for minimum wage, staring at photos of Rodrigo living the life that should have been hers too if only she had made different choices. If only she had valued what she had instead of throwing it all away for 3 months of superficial attention from someone who never truly cared. And the most painful part of all, the aspect that cut deeper than any financial or social loss, was that Amanda finally understood with absolute and devastating clarity that Rodrigo truly had been the love of her life, that she had held in her hands something precious and rare that most people spend their entire existence searching for and never find, and that she destroyed it so completely and irreversibly that there was no way back no matter how much she regretted it or how much time passed. She had had a man who genuinely loved her, who worked tirelessly to provide a life of absolute luxury, who never used money as a form of control but rather as an expression of love, who trusted her blindly even as signs of betrayal accumulated, and she betrayed all that trust and generosity in the cruelest possible way. Rodrigo had moved on and built an even better life without her, proving that Amanda was completely replaceable and that he never needed her to achieve greatness, but she would never be able to replace what she lost because men like Rodrigo simply do not appear twice in anyone's life. Amanda was trapped in a private hell of eternal regret, condemned to watch from afar as her ex-husband reached unimaginable heights while she sank deeper and deeper into a mediocre and miserable existence that would be her permanent reality for years or perhaps decades, the lasting and merciless consequence of having made the worst possible choices at the moment when it mattered most. 2 years had passed since the betrayal that destroyed Rodrigo and Amanda's marriage, 2 years during which he had completely transformed not only professionally and financially but emotionally as well. rebuilding the walls around his heart in a way that made it extremely difficult for anyone to truly break through the defenses he had erected after being hurt so deeply by someone he had trusted blindly. Rodrigo had gone out with dozens of women during that period, all beautiful and successful and interesting in different ways, but none of those casual relationships had evolved into anything deeper because he simply would not allow it to happen. He always kept a strategic emotional distance that protected him from vulnerability but also prevented him from experiencing genuine connection. He had mentally resigned himself to the idea that maybe serious relationships simply were no longer part of his destiny, that maybe it was safer and more sensible to focus exclusively on building his business empire and enjoy female company in a superficial way without ever investing emotionally enough to risk being betrayed again. It was with that protective, slightly cynical mindset about love and relationships that Rodrigo traveled to Paris on a rainy Tuesday in October to attend an international technology conference where he had been invited as a keynote speaker. Paris was one of Rodrigo's favorite cities. He appreciated the classic architecture blended with cosmopolitan modernity, the sophisticated culture that permeated every street and cafe, the exceptional food available on practically every corner, and the fact that no one there particularly cared who he was or how much money he had because the city was full of rich and important people from all over the world. After an intense morning speaking to an audience of more than 1,000 people about international expansion strategies for tech startups, receiving an enthusiastic standing ovation at the end of his presentation and being approached by dozens of people wanting to network or take selfies with him, Rodrigo was mentally exhausted and desperately needed a moment of peace away from the corporate world. He politely declined the business lunch invitations coming at him from every direction, left the five-star hotel where he was staying without telling anyone on his team where he was going, and simply began walking through the streets of Paris with no particular destination, wanting only to get a little lost in the city and have a few moments of relative anonymity where he could be just an ordinary tourist instead of the billionaire CEO everyone expected him to be. That was how, strolling unhurriedly through the tree-lined streets of the 6th arrondissement while the thin October rain gave everything that cinematic atmosphere Paris has in the fall, Rodrigo found a small, charming café tucked away on a side street that was clearly not a tourist spot but a place frequented by locals. It had only 10 cramped tables, authentic vintage decor that had probably been there for decades, the delicious smell of fresh coffee and newly baked croissants filling the air, and a cozy atmosphere that contrasted perfectly with the sterile luxury hotels and starred restaurants where Rodrigo normally spent time during business trips. He walked in slightly soaked from the rain, ordered a simple espresso in the functional French he had learned through multiple trips to Europe, and sat at a table near the window, watching people hurry along the street trying to escape the drizzle. It was while he was sitting there, completely relaxed and disconnected from the corporate world for the first time in weeks, that Rodrigo noticed the woman sitting a few tables ahead of him, completely absorbed in a laptop where she was working intensely on something that looked like architectural plans, given the technical drawings visible on the screen. She was beautiful in a way completely different from the women who usually surrounded Rodrigo at elite business social events. She didn't have that artificial, overly produced kind of beauty of someone who spends hours getting ready and applying heavy makeup, but rather a natural, effortless beauty that came from delicate features, slightly messy brown hair pulled into a loose bun, makeup-free skin showing a few freckles she clearly didn't bother to hide, and an expression of intense concentration that suggested someone genuinely passionate about the work she was doing. She wore casual, comfortable clothes, an oversized wool sweater that probably cost less than the buttons on the shirt Rodrigo was wearing, simple jeans, and worn sneakers that had clearly seen many miles of walking. There was something refreshing about that total simplicity, in the way she was completely immersed in her work without caring in the slightest about her appearance or who might be watching, and Rodrigo caught himself looking longer than would be considered polite, genuinely curious about who this woman was who seemed so intensely focused and at the same time so completely oblivious to the world around her. The waiter brought her more coffee, and it was during that brief interaction that Rodrigo heard her speak in Portuguese with a clearly Brazilian accent, thanking him in French but then murmuring something to herself in Portuguese about tight deadlines and demanding clients. The fact that she was Brazilian made everything even more interesting to Rodrigo, who suddenly felt an inexplicable urge to start a conversation, something he normally didn't do because he was constantly surrounded by people trying to get close to him for networking purposes or access to his fortune. But there, in that small cafe in Paris where no one knew who he was and where that woman was clearly too busy with her own work to pay attention to strangers, Rodrigo felt that maybe he could have a genuine interaction, uncontaminated by expectations about who he was or what he could offer. So he simply stood up, walked over to her table with his coffee in hand, and said in Portuguese with a smile that was genuine instead of calculated, "Sorry to interrupt, but I heard you speaking Portuguese and I thought I'd ask if I could sit here for a few minutes. It's rare to find Brazilians in hidden cafes in Paris, and it would be nice to talk in our native language for a few minutes if you don't mind. The woman looked up from her laptop, slightly surprised by the interruption, and Rodrigo could see she was mentally assessing whether he was just another guy trying to flirt in an inconvenient way or whether it was a genuine invitation for a casual conversation between two countrymen far from home. She must have seen something in his face that convinced her it was the second option, because after a few seconds of hesitation she smiled warmly and gestured to the empty chair across from her, saying, "Sure, sit. I actually needed a break anyway. I've been staring at these plans for 3 straight hours and my brain is starting to melt." Rodrigo sat down and they began talking in a surprisingly natural, fluid way. She introduced herself as Sofia, 30 years old, a Brazilian architect who had moved to Paris 5 years earlier to do a master's degree at the Sorbonne and ended up staying because she got a job at a renowned architecture firm that worked on high-end residential projects for European clients. Rodrigo introduced himself simply as Rodrigo, deliberately leaving out any mention of being the CEO of a billion-real company or having any significant wealth, and only said he was in Paris for a technology conference and was also taking the opportunity to explore the city a bit between professional commitments. The conversation flowed with an ease Rodrigo hadn't experienced in years, maybe had never experienced with such genuine intensity, because Sofia was incredibly interesting in ways that had nothing to do with appearance or social status but with intellectual depth and real passion for what she did. She spoke animatedly about sustainable architecture and how she was trying to incorporate ecological principles into luxury residential projects, about the frustration of dealing with clients who wanted nothing but showy extravagance with no substance versus the rare ones who genuinely appreciated good design, about how Paris had completely changed her perspective on urbanism and quality of life in big cities. Rodrigo shared thoughts about entrepreneurship and the challenges of building companies in competitive markets, always keeping the details general enough not to reveal the true scale of the success he had achieved. They discovered shared interests in contemporary art, in traveling to less touristy and more authentic places, in great food that didn't necessarily have to be expensive to be exceptional. Sofia had strong but well-grounded opinions about practically everything. She didn't automatically agree with Rodrigo just to please him the way so many women did when they found out who he really was, and that honest intellectual divergence was refreshing in a way he hadn't known he was missing. 2 hours passed without either of them noticing. What was supposed to be just a quick coffee break in both of their routines turned into a deep, engaging conversation that left Rodrigo genuinely reluctant to end it when Sofia finally glanced at the time and said she needed to go back to the office for a client meeting. Rodrigo, acting on a completely impulsive instinct that was entirely out of character for the calculated way he usually moved through the world, asked for her number and suggested they might have dinner together that night if she was free, and to his relief and surprise Sofia agreed without hesitation or strategic games, simply saying she would love to have dinner and that she knew a small but excellent restaurant in Le Marais that served traditional French food without being pretentious or absurdly expensive. They met that night at a restaurant that definitely didn't have Michelin stars but did have delicious food and a welcoming atmosphere, and the conversation kept flowing with the same natural ease as it had in the afternoon cafe, Sofia telling funny stories about eccentric clients and the challenges of living alone in a foreign country, Rodrigo sharing travel experiences and reflections on how professional success doesn't always translate into personal happiness, while still being careful not to reveal exactly how successful he really was. It was only at the end of that first night, when they had spent nearly 6 hours together between the afternoon coffee and the dinner and there was definitely an undeniable, exciting chemistry between them, that Sofia asked the question that would eventually reveal who Rodrigo really was. "So what tech company do you work for? You mentioned you're in Paris for a conference, but you never said exactly what you do." Rodrigo hesitated for a few seconds, genuinely unsure whether he should tell the truth and risk everything changing instantly the way it always changed when people found out about billionaire-level wealth, or whether he should continue the omission that was allowing that authentic connection to happen without the contamination of material expectations. But there was something in the way Sofia looked at him, a sincerity and genuine interest that didn't seem to be seeking anything beyond getting to know him as a person, that made Rodrigo choose honesty. "I'm actually the CEO of my own company. It's a Brazilian tech startup that's grown a lot over the past few years and is now expanding internationally. I was speaking at Tech Summit Paris this morning." He watched Sofia's reaction carefully, looking for signs that the information about business success would change the dynamic between them, but to his relief and genuine surprise she just nodded with interest and said, "That's awesome. It must be challenging but rewarding to build something from scratch. Honestly, I don't follow the tech world much. I'm always so focused on architecture, so I have no idea what company it is, but it sounds impressive. And it was in that moment, realizing that Sophia genuinely didn't know who he was and didn't particularly care about the size of his fortune or his social status, that Rodrigo felt something he hadn't experienced since before Amanda's betrayal. Real hope that maybe genuine connection was still possible, that maybe not all relationships had to be contaminated by material interest or social calculation. They kept seeing each other over the following days while Rodrigo was still in Paris, always in simple, authentic places Sophia knew because she lived there, neighborhood cafes, family-run restaurants, walks along the Seine talking about everything and nothing, and gradually Rodrigo revealed more details about his life while Sophia shared her own stories and ambitions. She was impressed when she eventually Googled him and discovered the true scale of his business success and billionaire-level fortune, but impressed in a genuine way about his professional achievements rather than suddenly interested in the money, and she continued to treat him exactly the same way she had before she knew, without excessive flattery or a shift in behavior that suggested his net worth had changed her perception of who he was as a person. Sophia had her own successful career that she loved, her own apartment in Paris that she paid for with her own salary, her own fully independent life that didn't need anyone to validate or finance it, and that genuine independence was possibly the most attractive thing about her to someone like Rodrigo, who had been used and betrayed by someone who clearly valued the lifestyle he provided more than the man he truly was. 3 years had passed since that devastating day when Rodrigo found Amanda in bed with Tiago, 3 years that completely transformed both of their lives but in diametrically opposite directions, as different as they could possibly be if they had been deliberately designed to create the maximum contrast. The relationship between Rodrigo and Sophia, which began in that small cafe in Paris where he finally lowered his emotional defenses enough to allow genuine connection, had evolved slowly but steadily into something deep and true, everything his marriage to Amanda never was. Sophia had moved to Brazil after 2 years of long-distance dating that worked surprisingly well because both of them were genuinely committed to making it work. She secured a transfer to the Brazilian office of the architecture firm where she had worked in Paris, maintaining the professional and financial independence she valued so much. They lived together in the 25 million real mansion Rodrigo had bought, but Sophia insisted on paying a proportional share of the household expenses even though it was completely unnecessary given his billionaire fortune, because she was determined to preserve a sense of equal partnership rather than being supported the way Amanda had been. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, genuine admiration for each other's professional accomplishments, intellectually stimulating conversations that lasted for hours, and above all real love that did not depend on money or status but on deep compatibility of values and life goals. So on a rainy Thursday in March, exactly 3 years and 2 months after the betrayal that destroyed his first marriage, Rodrigo proposed to Sophia in a way that was completely different from how he had proposed to Amanda years earlier. There was no elaborate flash mob or showy public proposal meant to be filmed and posted on social media. There was no absurdly expensive ring chosen only for its impressive price tag. There was no calculated display designed to provoke envy in other people. Instead, Rodrigo simply prepared an intimate dinner on the mansion's terrace overlooking the strategically lit garden, personally cooked Sophia's favorite dish using a recipe he had spent weeks secretly perfecting, and in the middle of dessert he took her hand and said with absolute sincerity straight from his heart, "Sophia, you taught me it's possible to trust again, that it's possible to love for real without fear of being used or betrayed, that relationships can be built on something much bigger than superficial attraction or material convenience. You make me want to be a better person every day, not just a successful businessman but a whole man who balances career with a meaningful personal life. I love you in a way I never knew it was possible to love someone, and I want to know if you would accept marrying me so we can build the rest of our lives together." The ring he offered was beautiful but discreet, an elegant solitaire that cost a fraction of what he could easily afford because they both agreed that the symbolic value mattered infinitely more than the monetary price, and Sophia said yes with genuine tears of joy in her eyes, saying there was nothing in the world she wanted more. The wedding was carefully planned to take place 6 months after the proposal, enough time to organize everything the way they wanted without rush or unnecessary stress. Unlike Rodrigo's previous wedding to Amanda, which had cost more than 500,000 reais and included 300 guests in an ostentatious event designed mainly to impress high society, the wedding with Sophia would be something entirely different. An intimate ceremony in the Italian countryside of Tuscany, with only 50 carefully selected people among close family and true friends who genuinely cared about the couple's happiness, discreet but absurdly luxurious in a way that prioritized quality over quantity and authentic experience over superficial showmanship. They rented a fully restored 16th-century villa perched on top of a hill with panoramic views of vineyards stretching to the horizon, a place of such natural, perfect beauty that it barely needed additional decoration beyond simple arrangements of local wildflowers. The ceremony would take place at sunset in a garden lined with centuries-old cypress trees, followed by a dinner prepared by a renowned local chef using organic ingredients produced in the region, and then an intimate celebration where everyone could actually talk and celebrate instead of mechanically circulating among hundreds of strangers the way people do at weddings that are simply too large. The chosen date was a Saturday in September, when the weather in Tuscany would be perfect, neither too hot nor too cold, just that pleasant late summer European temperature that would allow an outdoor celebration without discomfort. Rodrigo and Sofia decided to keep the wedding relatively private, with no press coverage or professional photographers selling images to celebrity magazines, only a discreet photographer hired to capture genuine moments without turning the entire day into a staged photo shoot. But they agreed to share a few selected images on social media afterward, not out of a need for external validation but simply as a modern way to share joy with the wider circle of people who cared about them but could not be present due to the limited guest list. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with final preparations, confirmations of logistical details, and above all, real excitement about finally making official a union that already felt solid and permanent long before any formal ceremony took place. Rodrigo was genuinely happy in a way he hadn't felt in years, and close friends often commented on how he seemed like a completely different person with Sofia compared to how he had been during his marriage to Amanda. While all of that was happening in Rodrigo's world, where he was literally living a real-life fairy tale with a deserved happy ending after years of hard work and overcoming devastating betrayal, Amanda remained trapped in the downward spiral her life had become since the consequences of her actions asserted themselves in relentless, irreversible ways. She was still working at that mall clothing store earning 1.5 times the minimum wage, which barely covered the basic expenses of survival. She still lived in the tiny 35-square-meter apartment with leaks and broken furniture. She still hadn't managed to rebuild a meaningful social life or find a romantic relationship that came close to filling the void left by losing Rodrigo. The savings that once existed had been gone for a long time. She lived literally paycheck to paycheck with no financial safety margin, and the prospect of improvement simply did not exist on the visible horizon because Amanda, at 31, had no specialized skills that would allow her to get a better job and no emotional energy to invest in education or training that could change her professional trajectory. She had gained 20 kilos since the separation because cheap food tends to be unhealthy and because chronic depression, untreated due to the lack of money for private therapy, often results in significant weight gain. The appearance that used to be impeccable was now merely average at best, and the hair and skin care she once maintained through expensive treatments at luxury salons was simply no longer possible within the tight budget that defined her current reality. Amanda still stalked Rodrigo's social media obsessively, even though she knew that every view was pure psychological self-torture. She simply couldn't stop checking what he was doing, who he was with, what places he was visiting, what incredible life he continued building while she sank deeper and deeper into inescapable mediocrity. That was how, on a Saturday afternoon when she was lying on the old couch in her tiny apartment after yet another exhausting week spent standing 8 hours a day dealing with often rude customers, Amanda opened Instagram on her cracked-screen phone and immediately saw a new photo of Rodrigo that made her heart literally stop for a few seconds. The image showed him and Sofia, both dressed elegantly in outfits that were clearly wedding attire even if they weren't the traditional black suit and white dress, posing in an absolutely stunning garden with cypress trees and an old villa in the background, the Tuscan sunset creating naturally perfect lighting that looked like it came straight out of an Italian romantic film. Rodrigo looked visibly more handsome than Amanda had ever seen him, not only because of the physical transformation he had gone through but because of the genuine happiness written across his face, that radiant smile of someone experiencing one of the best days of his life. And Sofia was absolutely beautiful in a natural, authentic way, wearing a simple but elegant dress that probably cost a fraction of what Amanda spent on her own wedding dress years earlier, her hair down in effortless waves, no heavy makeup, just herself being enough. The caption was short but devastatingly happy. "Today I married my best friend, my life partner, the woman who taught me that true love exists and is worth every second of waiting. Thank you, Sofia, for choosing to build the future by my side. Thank you to everyone who was present on this special day celebrating with us in Tuscany. Here begins our next adventure together." The photo already had more than 200,000 likes even though it had been posted only a few hours earlier, and the comments were thousands of people offering enthusiastic congratulations, saying they were the most beautiful couple, that they deserved all the happiness in the world, that it was inspiring to see true love win. Amanda scrolled compulsively through the comments, feeling a toxic mix of emotions that included devastating jealousy, crushing regret, irrational anger at Sophia for having what she had lost, and above all a deep, incurable sadness over having completely ruined her own life through terrible choices she could never undo. She kept stalking the other wedding photos Rodrigo had posted, images showing details of the intimate but luxurious celebration, short videos of moments from the ceremony where he and Sophia exchanged vows that were clearly personally written and deeply meaningful, stories showing the dinner at a long table under hanging lights strung between centuries-old trees, with guests talking animatedly. Then Amanda did something even more masochistic. She went to Sophia's Instagram profile, something she had avoided doing during the years she knew they were together because seeing the woman who had replaced her was too painful to process. Sophia's profile had fewer than 10,000 followers, a modest number that indicated she wasn't an influencer or chasing validation through social media, and the content she posted was mostly related to the architecture projects she worked on, travel photos showing genuine appreciation for urban design and natural landscapes, and occasional images with Rodrigo that clearly weren't posed to generate engagement but rather spontaneous moments captured honestly. The most recent was obviously from the wedding, a photo of her and Rodrigo looking at each other in a way that communicated deep intimacy and real love, and the caption simply said, "I married the love of my life today. 3 years ago we met by chance in a cafe in Paris, and today we built a life together based on mutual respect, genuine admiration, and above all a love that grows stronger every day. Rodrigo, thank you for loving me the way you do, for supporting me in everything I do, for being my true partner in every sense. I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." Amanda read those words and cried, not the strategic tears she used to use to manipulate situations, but the deep, desperate sob of someone who finally understands the full magnitude of what she lost and will never recover. Photos from the wedding kept appearing over the following days as guests posted their own images and videos from the event, and Amanda watched it all with a sick compulsion she couldn't control even though she knew she was only prolonging and intensifying her own suffering. She saw pictures of the stunning villa where the ceremony took place, of the dinner under the stars that probably cost a fortune but was done with taste instead of vulgar ostentation, of guests clearly having genuine fun instead of simply fulfilling a social obligation, and each image was a brutal reminder that Rodrigo had found real happiness with someone who valued him the way he had always deserved to be valued. Amanda thought about her own wedding to Rodrigo years earlier, that expensive, flashy event with 300 guests where she cared more about posting beautiful photos on social media than actually appreciating the meaning of the commitment she was making, where she chose a 200,000 real dress because it was the most expensive and not because it was the most beautiful, where everything was designed to impress other people instead of celebrating genuine love. And she realized painfully that even her wedding to Rodrigo had been superficial and empty compared to what he now had with Sophia, that she had never truly loved him the way she should have, that she had always been more interested in what he provided than in who he really was as a person. That night, alone in the tiny, miserable apartment that had become her permanent reality, Amanda finally allowed the complete, devastating truth to fully penetrate the last defenses of denial she still clung to. She had lost the love of her life, she had completely destroyed the best thing she would ever have, and now she was condemned to watch from afar while he lived happily ever after with someone better. Rodrigo was toasting with Dom Perignon 1996, a rare vintage that cost more than 20,000 reais per bottle, beside Sophia in some luxurious suite of a 5-star hotel in Tuscany, probably making passionate love the way newlyweds do, planning a honeymoon in exotic destinations, discussing the brilliant future they would build together now that they had made their union official. And Amanda was there, alone, overweight, poor, miserable, working for minimum wage, living in a place that would make anyone familiar with her luxurious past cry with pity, with no prospects of improvement, no meaningful relationship, no true friends, nothing at all except eternal regret and bitter memories of what she had and threw away through monumental stupidity that would haunt her for the rest of her existence. Amanda had lost a man worth billions, not only in money but in character, in generosity, in the capacity to love unconditionally. Rodrigo had lost a woman who was worth absolutely nothing, a self-interested trader who pretended to love him just to gain access to luxury. And that was the final, inescapable truth of this story. Some decisions have permanent consequences, some betrayals destroy not only relationships but entire lives, and some people realized too late that they had everything in their hands and chose to throw it away for nothing that was truly worth it. And there it is. The complete story of how a man who gave everything lost everything, but then got it all back multiplied by 10. while the woman who had everything in her hands literally threw billions in the trash for 3 months of attention from a guy who only wanted to use her money. Or rather, her husband's money. Rodrigo today is a billionaire, married to a woman who truly loves him, living the best version of his life. Amanda today works for minimum wage, lives in a 35 square meter apartment, and spends her days stalking her ex-husband's social media watching everything she lost. And you know what this teaches you? That character is worth more than any Lamborghini. That loyalty is worth more than any 12 million real penthouse. That some decisions you can't take back no matter how much you regret them later. Why did Amanda cheat? Because her husband worked too much? The guy was literally building an empire to give her a life of luxury. She wanted attention? He gave her multi-million-dollar gifts, international trips, everything she asked for. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough because she simply had no character. Now I want you to reflect on something. How many times have you seen someone in your life complaining that they don't get enough attention, that their partner works too much, that they feel lonely in the relationship, while at the same time living a luxury life that is only possible because that partner works like crazy? How many times have you seen someone justify cheating with excuses about feeling neglected or emotionally deprived, as if that made betrayal acceptable? The hard truth is this: cheating has no justification. It never did. It never will. If you're unhappy in a relationship, you leave. You talk. You try to fix it. You don't cowardly cheat while using the other person's money to finance your own affair. And Rodrigo's story proves that those who act with integrity, who work hard, who value character above everything else, eventually win. Always. It may take time, it may hurt along the way, but in the end, justice is served. So I ask you, are you the Rodrigo or the Amanda of your story? Are you the person who builds, who works, who values what they have? Or are you the person who destroys, who betrays, who only realizes the value of things after losing everything? And if you're going through something similar, if you were betrayed by someone you trusted, let me tell you something. You will get through it. It will hurt, it will feel impossible at first, but you will get through it and you will build something much better. Rodrigo is living proof of that. He could have collapsed, he could have sunk into depression, he could have let the betrayal destroy him. But instead he turned pain into power. He turned anger into ambition. He tripled the value of his company. He became a billionaire. He found a real woman. And he lived happily ever after while the one who betrayed him sank into the misery she deserved. Now answer me in the comments. Do you think Amanda deserved a second chance? Did Rodrigo do the right thing by being so cold with her when she begged for forgiveness? And what would you do if you were in his place? Would you give her another chance or tell her to take care of her own life like he did? I want to know your honest opinion, so scroll down to the comments and tell me what you think. And if you liked this story, if you felt satisfied seeing justice being served, hit that like button to support the channel. Share this video with that friend who needs to hear this story, who needs to understand that actions have consequences and that cheating never pays off in the end. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet, because I bring stories like this every week, real stories of revenge, overcoming adversity, money, and power that will make you question everything about relationships and values. And turn on notifications because you don't want to miss the next video that's coming, and I guarantee it's even more shocking than this one. Thank you for watching until the end, and always remember, the one who laughs last laughs best. And Rodrigo is laughing very well at his life now.